Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yah-Mean of Revolution, and trust no one. Putin is learning this the hard way. Before we get into this, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. The U.S. empire is still kicking. The U.S. has flexed major muscle and shown the world they would take the whole world down with them. So if they releasing the head choppers on the world, the killer of the Christians, they definitely will start World War III. They're showing the whole world that. And President Putin now has some deep decisions that he has to make because the U.S. is willing to go all the way. What is he willing to do? Let's get right into this today, y'all.
As I said in Parliament in 2001 to the then government of Tony Blair, don't talk to me about Al-Qaeda. I was opposing Al-Qaeda when the British state were stuffing guns and money down the throat of Osama bin Laden. Don't talk to me about Bashar al-Assad or his father. His father and him were presidents of Syria for 50 years. I was, as you well know, with Iraq in the great divide, let's call it a chasm of the Arab Ba'ath Party, an Arab nationalist dictatorship in both countries, and definitely in the case of Syria, an Arab nationalist dictatorship for 50 years. I had no relations with Syria. I have not visited there for many years, and nothing I'm going to say now indicates any love for the Syrian government, as was prior to waking up this morning. Everything I'm going to say in the next few minutes is about the love that I have for the Syrian people, the admiration, the reverence, actually, for the fidelity to the Arab national cause that the Syrian people and even the Syrian state has always exemplified. The Syrian national movement founded Arab nationalism in Damascus, the longest serving capital city in the entire world. The Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party didn't have much to do with socialism, long forgotten and not widely practiced even before it was forgotten. But it was a citadel of...
It's something that we learning in this situation. I'm definitely learning. And that is the treachery in the Arab world, that they're going to have to fight for themselves, and nobody is going to liberate or free them, because they're going to have to show the world, because Putin sees now, and Xi Jinping is looking, the African world is looking. Now I see why the African world, and I see why, as I sat back and watched what was going on with Palestine at the beginning, I didn't know why the revolutionaries wouldn't, they'll say some things, but they're not sending the warriors like Cuba used to do. Cuba used to send soldiers to go fight these type of battles, but nobody was sending their soldiers. And this is a learning lesson for me, because I'm sitting there like, why the boots not getting on the ground? Well, court, this is why. Do you put your people in harm's way when they not fighting for themselves? Even Hamas, they fighting, but they're not actually fighting for freedom. They fighting for this. This is a very tricky situation right here that Putin got himself caught up in, trying to save the Christians. And I feel a certain way about Syria, because I used to have a lot of respect for him. I feel a certain way, especially Assad. He definitely is a coward. Shalom. He never could go out like Gaddafi. Gaddafi was a real leader who died in his country, never was going to flee. This man fled his country and left the country in the hands of the head choppers. But even for the people the regular Syrian civilians, the regular Syrians, they didn't fight back. Why are they not fighting back? Why are they not fighting back? Why do they allow the head choppers to come into Damascus and come into homes? And this is something that's very suspicious to me. That's why the Persians decided not to go all the way in, because they seen that the Syrian generals, they didn't want to stand on behalf of the resistance any longer. And this is why the African nations, they took a look, and now I'm looking like, see, you get yourself trapped up into liberation for the Middle East. And I got a lot of respect. I want everybody to have some liberation, but this is very fucked up that Putin, the Russians been dying in Syria, the Iranians been dying in Syria, and the Syrians didn't even not want to fight for their own liberation. They put Al-Qaeda in charge. And I said that to say this. Al-Qaeda is racist bastards who put black people in cages in Libya. We know they some racist bastards. We know this. So when people say, well, everybody in Syria, the opposition, they wasn't Al-Qaeda, I don't give a damn. If you ain't Al-Qaeda, you working with them. That's just like in Ukraine. They say, well, everybody in Ukraine, they're not the neo-Nazis. I don't give a damn. You working with the neo-Nazis. See, you don't, our people got to pay attention to what's going on, because it's individuals willing to side with Al-Qaeda who hate us, individuals willing to side with the Nazis who hate us, just to get their, whatever they feel like they're supposed to be receiving after the war ends, or for the battles that's taking place all around the globe. This is very interesting.
The essential dignity of the Arab masses, that their people were a people, that their nation were a nation, wahad, one people, from the Atlantic to the Gulf. They never bent the knee to the Israeli state next door. They never surrendered their sovereignty over the Golan Heights, an area which has now been vastly expanded by an Israeli invasion of Lebanon. You haven't heard about the Israeli invasion of Syria yet, although you're never done hearing about other countries invading their neighbors. But the invasion of Syria this afternoon by Benjamin Netanyahu, while he stood on the Golan Heights, illegally annexed, but belonging to Syria ever since it was seized in 1967, was exultant about the role, which cannot be denied, that Israel has played in the downfall of the Syrian government and the flight of its president and his family to political asylum in Russia, in Moscow, which is where they are currently ensconced. It would have behoven President Assad to make a farewell address, even if pre-recorded, to his people. It would have behoven Assad to thank all those who sacrificed, for example, to defend the tomb of Zainab, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. Thousands gave their blood to defend that shrine, and now it is on fire. Now it has been set alight by the HTS. Everything I'm going to say to you tonight stems from my hatred of fundamentalist fanaticism, of the death cult that is ISIS and Al-Qaeda. My hatred of the takfiriism, the sectarianism, the murderous hatred of anything that is different from your narrow interpretation of your religion. Even people who share your religion, even people who share the same sect of your religion. Anyone who is different in any way has to be murdered and decapitated and mutilated and maimed and killed in the most horrendous ways. I don't have to look in the crystal ball for that. I can look at what happened when this ISIS Al-Qaeda phenomenon took control of significant parts of Syria over the last 12 or so years. I can tell you that the people they butchered, the heads that they cut off, the throats that they slit, the hearts that they ate, the churches that they burned, the relics that they destroyed, the nuns that they kidnapped, the priests that they murdered, the bishops that they murdered, are all still haunting them. and they haunt my perception of what they might do now that they are back in control, not just of some parts of Syria, but in control of the state itself. The leader, de facto, of the new Syria is a man called al-Jolani. Well, that's not really
crazy. These people out of their goddamn mind. Syria has more advanced weapons than Hezbollah. Just imagine that. Just imagine they've given Al-Qaeda advanced weapons. Remember, Syria was giving Hezbollah advanced weapons to use, against Israel at times. That was another sin they was committing. So just imagine these people have better weapons now. These terrorists have better weapons than what Hezbollah had. The Pandora's box that NATO and the U.S. and Israel has opened. They're gonna pay for this, but I don't know how. But they're gonna pay. They're gonna pay for this.
Really his name, like Tommy Robinson, he adopted that name. His real identity need not concern you, but his CV definitely should. He was the deputy leader to al-Zarqawi, the Al-Qaeda leader in Iraq. Then he was sent to Syria as the deputy leader to the founder of ISIS. The founder of ISIS was the number one, and al-Jolani was the number two of ISIS in Syria.
Come on, man.
And now he's the de facto leader.
Come on, man. They did this shit on purpose, man. You just listen to what they did this on purpose. Al-Baghdadi is dead. He told you Al-Baghdadi was number one. Jolani was number two. They don't put. So when Baghdadi died, he's number one over ISIS and him. They don't put this man in charge of Damascus. This man got advanced weapons now. And to see CNN and MSNBC and Sky News, to the mental gymnastics, the words they're using to go around that they have put the leader of Al-Qaeda in charge of Syria is crazy. But to see you have people in the streets of Syria, they're chanting, that's not fake. That ain't North Korea. That's not North Korea, though. So when you see a video of people out there cheering, those people are actually genuinely happy to see Al-Qaeda. Come on, man, we got to face this. This is a reality. It's millions of people in Syria embracing the head chopping, the racism, the barbarism. That's a fact. The news is, and when them stations is putting that up, that's not fake. That's not Hollywood, man. And that's what pissed me off right there. And I know Putin is very pissed. His soldiers done died defending these goddamn people, and they sitting there embracing ISIS.
Of Syria. Al-Baghdadi thought highly of his work. And he can certainly look up from hell where I hope he currently burns.
See, I know Putin did not want to take Assad neither. I know he did not want to bring Assad to Russia after Assad folded like lawn chair, his army folded, but he had to take him, or his allies around the world will really look at him different. The leaders who he promised that if your country, we're going to defend you, but even if your country fall, I won't let you get your head chopped off or you won't be done like Saddam or Gaddafi. See, so now leaders will be like, okay, at least Putin won't let him do me like Gaddafi and Saddam.
And see that he has in the end triumphed. And he has triumphed precisely because the Western Empire facilitated his entry into Damascus and helped him to hang the black flags.
Come on, into Damascus.
On the Umayyad Mosque, the black flags on the presidential palace in Damascus once it stops burning, because that too is on fire. The Western Empire and its Israeli satrapy played, as Netanyahu boasted today, the most important and decisive role in the destruction of what was the Syrian Arab Republic. Heaven knows what it will be by the end of all this. It'll be many things, but it won't be Syrian, it won't be Arab, and it won't be a republic. presumably some kind of hodgepodge of balkanized ethno-states, like the Israeli state next door, will be the result. But only time will tell about that. The fact that we have put the former deputy head of ISIS in power
They're not going to talk
in Damascus, the former deputy head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq has been...
And he started getting into it with Al-Qaeda. See, he did denounce Al-Qaeda, but that was a play. Turkey told him to do it to pretend like they were still chopping people's heads off and still eating their livers on video. They still would take your spleen out and eat it. Still eat your heart on camera. But Al-Qaeda told Giuliani that he was doing way too much. They said, come on, brother, you are too crazy. So remember that Al-Qaeda told him he was going too far. Bin Laden said, oh man, he's nuts.
Has been put in power in Damascus is what I'm talking about this evening, and will be with two of our most outstanding guests, Professor Marandi from the University of Tehran and Scott Ritter, the former UN arms inspector and former intelligence officer in the United States Marine Corps. I'm not speaking for them. They won't necessarily have views that agree entirely with mine. In fact, I'm certain that they won't. But these are my honestly held views, and they are the views of someone who, between 1980 and 2002, never set foot in Syria and would not have been wanted there if I had.
Oh, we will be covering tomorrow, because I got to stick to World War III. It is late breaking news that Jay-Z has officially been accused of R-wording. Y'all know what that means. A 13-year-old with P. Diddy. So it's official. It's over the news. Y'all can take a look at that. We're going to officially go over all of that tomorrow. I got to deal with World War III right now. I can't be. You see what they did? You see what they did? Jay-Z is a big name to distract you from World War III. They say, fuck it, bring Jay out. Man, that's crazy. I didn't even notice that till I just did that. So yes, it's on the media. It's out on the news. Jay-Z is officially accused. He going down, and P. Diddy probably bringing him down. So we're going to deal with that tomorrow. But that is a goddamn distraction, and they did that on purpose.
The truth is,
they put Al-Qaeda in.
That
They don't want to talk about it.
Rejoicing of the empire and of Netanyahu can be borne much more easily than I can bear the rejoicing of the liberals. The liberal progressives, the Yanis Varoufakis of the world, the Keir Starmers and Angela Rayners, the Emmanuel Macrons, and the people with Palestine flags in their bios, people who have told us for the last 14 months how Palestine was in their heart, rejoicing about a great and historic Israeli victory. You have to know this. What happened today in Syria is a death blow to Palestinian resistance. What happened today in Syria is a death blow to the Lebanese resistance. What happened today in Syria is a death blow to the axis of resistance, which now has no corridor through which to funnel the necessary material. Netanyahu told you, don't believe me.
The Arab world, and this ain't the Arab people, the Arab leaders didn't want no axis of resistance. They have folded to Israel. You see? Nobody wants to fight Israel but the Persians. They're not Arab. Hezbollah, that's a militia. That's not a government. Hamas, that's a militia. That's not a government. The only Arab state that was helping do it was Syria. And to get to help Hamas, you got to go through Syria. To get to help Hezbollah, you got to go through Syria. That's over with. The Houthi freedom fighters. They still in power, but they finna target them too now. Iran better know what time it is, man. They not finna stop.
There is now no road from Iran to the Lebanese resistance, and from the Lebanese resistance to the Gaza Strip, to the West Bank. Know that as you dance on the political grave of al-Assad and his government. Know that you are celebrating a strategic victory of unimaginable dimension, and a victory that cannot be over-exaggerated. This is a stunning reversal of political fortunes. Joe Biden has played a binder in the last days of his presidency. No one knew he had it in him. He's canceled the elections in Romania that were about to be won by a landslide of the guy who wanted to stop the war in Ukraine and wanted peaceful relations with Russia. He's got them fighting on the streets of Georgia. He's got them dying in their hundreds every day in Gaza. He's got half of the Gaza Strip completely eliminated. He's forced a ceasefire on the Lebanese resistance, the only organized Arab assistance to the Palestinian cause anywhere on the planet. Anywhere. None of them. No Gulf state, no Maghrebi state, no Levantine state.
But the Muslim world, it's good Muslims out there. Probably some of our audience, it's good Muslims out there, you know. But we're gonna have to sit back and study this. The Muslim world kneel to Israel. The state, they are billions in weapons. They are trying to yell in the UN and tell us about the genocide that's taking place. It's a fact that happened. Netanyahu is like Hitler. That's a fact. He like Hitler. But they not do the ones who doing something about it, they paying the price. As these Arab kingdoms, like I say, the Arab nations of Africa, only thing a lot of them doing is fighting one another and helping the Arab dictators conquer Africa. Except the revolutionary Arab leaders like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they're not going to be able to get this off. They think we not watching. Do they not believe in their book or their prophet? Do they not understand what's happening? They are scared of the U.S. They are scared of Israel. That's a fact. Iran not. And the resistance that they had not. But the resistance is being broken. Oh, yeah. And I did see today, I got to dig up some more, that Iran announced that it will be announcing that it said something about it, announced it will be letting the whole world know that it's a nuclear state. Now, I seen that in one of my articles that I usually get a lot of information on. So if they say that Israel, only way Israel gonna pay the price and the U.S. gonna pay the price if Iran come out and let the whole world know, okay, now we're a nuclear power. Y'all want to play rough? And that's what they got to do. To change the whole conversation. Let them know, okay, that was the last step. We're nuclear like North Korea.
Only the Lebanese resistance and the great people of Yemen, the true heroes of this last 14 months, nothing will now exist. Hezbollah is still a strong organization, but it now will have no money and it will now have no new weapons. And soon it will have no bullets at all. Nothing stands in the way. Syria lies on the floor, prone, with its neighbors, able to take whatever it is that they want.
Come on, man. The U.S. and Israel designers, they let the whole world know, man. They they got beat up in Ukraine and Putin flexed on them, but you think they through? This is a global chessboard. There's other places that they will have so death and destruction. Putin, you want to be a Christian nation? Okay, we will release the head choppers to kill all the Christians in the Middle East, and you won't be able to do nothing about it.
That's the stakes that were lost today with the collapse of the Syrian state. Israel has already taken and is ready to take more. From tonight, Israel is in a state of war with Syria. The chief of the Israeli army has declared it. The Israeli tanks are on the move.
They already start seizing Syrian land. Like I told you they was going to do yesterday. They already start blowing up all of the Syrian air defense systems that they couldn't get to with assault and power. All of the weapon storehouses that they say they would never let these radicals get their hands on. How crazy is that? Now Israel is saying, oh man, these people are dangerous. We got to blow all of this stuff up. This is crazy.
They smashed through the gate of their annexed part of the Golan Heights into Konetra and the Syrian side of the Golan district.
And the terrorists ain't doing
shit. They're on the move. They're going to take whatever they want. When asked about it, Jolani, who comes from the Golan Heights, said we do not have the capacity to do anything about this.
Imagine it.
Syria's air defenses, its aeroplanes, its heavy artillery are all being destroyed right now in an Israeli blitzkrieg bombing, laying waste.
That's what the military gets.
Syria is now defenseless. Anyone can take anything they want.
I hate that this is happening to the innocent people, especially the minorities, especially the Christians. Especially the Christians, because they done had hell for a long time in the Middle East. Especially them, because they ass finna face a nightmare. The ones that don't get smoked out. They finna face a nightmare. Forced conversion on the spot, or you're dead. Your women is getting enslaved. Come on, these cats want hundreds of wives and thousands of concubines. This ain't no game.
From Syria. They've taken the corridor from Iran. They will undoubtedly take the Russian military base in Tartus. As it happens, there are no Russian ships there at the moment. They're out in the Mediterranean, which may or may not be a coincidence. But Russia will not have any Mediterranean base to come back to. Even if a deal was done, even if they're going to be allowed to keep it, they will not be allowed to keep it for long. Russia's airbase has closed. The Russian embassy now has no flag flying on it. Matter of time, in my opinion, before it is sacked and destroyed. China's Silk Route is now dead. No country on the Mediterranean will dare now participate in it. The Mediterranean exit of the Silk Route is now closed. But here I turn to what may be, for some, the most painful blow of all. The Syrian people are the biggest losers. They will now have to live under the black flags of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and hope that the New York Times and CNN are right and that the man who co-founded ISIS in Syria is a leopard which changed its spots.
Hell no.
Diversity is now...
See, this is the problem. They don't understand. Jelani not going to be able to tell those barbarians that he done brought from all over the world and promised them an Islamic caliphate that, no, we're going to be secular and we're going to allow all kind of different faiths and women going to be able to be liberal and walk. Hey, what? Are you nuts? He won't make it 10 seconds talking like that around those lunatics. Remember that. He won't make it. They will assassinate him. This is a major mistake, but this is what they've done in history. This is the story of Frankenstein. They created this monster, but they were just worrying about weakening Putin. They haven't even thought about what's to come, or maybe they have.
Oh, their motto, don't you know? Syrian people, especially Syrian women, especially Syrian Christians, Syrian Shiites, Syrian Alawites, Druze, Kurds, they're all the biggest losers. But the next biggest loser is Iran. The truth is, Iran did not just lose its corridor to supply the Lebanese resistance and thus the Palestinian resistance with the wherewithal to resist, to be a resistance, to exist as a resistance. Iran suddenly became very isolated indeed. From being the head, the heart of a whole axis of resistance,
That's a fact.
Iran would be well advised to put whatever money it's now going to save, not having to help prop up the Syrian government, to making sure that they prop up their own. Iran's prestige, status,
Oh no,
image.
it's gonna happen. I can already see. Oh no. Iran is in big trouble. Iran is in big trouble because it has citizens in its own country that's tired of the mullahs, the Islamic mullahs that run Iran. Iran has its own problem. It should have never allowed this. This was a dangerous mistake, and it's going to pay for it.
Strength, soft power has all been gravely damaged over the last 24 hours, as has Russia's. Russia and Iran and China, which had invested less and therefore will suffer less. But Iran, Russia, and China have all suffered mightily in the overthrow of the Syrian Arab Republic. And people are asking, why did Syria not do more? Not in the last 10 days, but it's now clear that the Syrian state had become hollowed out by sanctions. It couldn't afford to pay the soldiers that it demobilized since 2017. Why did its allies not ensure that it was able to pay them? Why did Russia and Iran not know that so emaciated had become Syrian state power that a tiny finger could have pushed it over? And that is what happened. Jolani leads at maximum 25,000 fighters. The Syrian army was 200,000 strong. Then there were the various militias that staved off this disaster many times over the last 10 years. Why was it allowed to become so hollowed out that its defeat, when it came, was not even with a whimper, it was with a squeak? Why did Iran not realize the price itself would pay if the Syrian state were to collapse?
Too late now.
Why did Russia not realize the price it would pay in prestige, in logistics, in soft power?
But they playing by rules.
In every way.
They playing by rules. I tell you, they playing by these rules that has been set, and they got to stop playing these games with lawless empires, and it's cost them everything,
including its naval and air bases in the country. And why didn't they take steps to stop from happening what happened today? Well, we're in a good place. We can ask at least some of those questions right now to our first guest this evening, our beloved guest this evening, Professor Syed Muhammad.
See, Syria failed the test this time. They fought hard the first time. They failed the test this time. Like I said, the African nations, they passed the test. And I told y'all what the test was. Putin will give you the weapons and back you if you are willing to fight for yourself. If you're willing to fight and your people are willing to die, then he will not abandon you. And they just proved right here in Syria. He's standing with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. He's losing, but they're on the front lines fighting hard, and they're standing tall through it all. So Putin has gave them advanced weapons. Syria failed the test. You think the Russians gonna die, the Iranians gonna die while you make deals with ISIS? And that's what the generals did. A lot of and I found this out, and this is very crazy. Some generals in Syria, because of the U.S. sanctions, were making $40 a month. That's crazy. That can get you overthrown. That can get your country crushed. The terrorists was getting $2,000 to $3,000 a month. Come on, man. That's crazy. You paying your generals $40?
Allow me, please, to ask you some searching questions.
Thank you, George. First of all, with regards to your poll, I think Jake Sullivan, if he had the right to vote, or if he had the courage to vote, or if he would admit the truth once again, as he did in his email to Hillary Clinton on February the 12th, 2012, that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria, he would vote that it is a CIA-backed organization. ISIS and Al-Qaeda were both supported by the CIA. We know from that email, we know from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012 that Turkey and despots in the Persian Gulf and U.S. allies in the region were wanted to create a Salafist entity between Syria and Iraq to isolate Syria. Well, what was that entity? It was ISIS. So they created Al-Qaeda. They supported ISIS. And then Kerry said, we allowed, in a leaked audio, he said, we and Qatar and Turkey and Saudi Arabia funded ISIS. And he admitted that they allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus. And I think it was Obama, when ISIS invaded Iraq, in, I think, an interview with Atlantic, he said, we allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus to put pressure on the prime minister, Nouri al-Maliki. So, and Hillary Clinton once admitted that we created Al-Qaeda. It's clear as day who is behind these groups. It's clear as day that Erdogan is the person first and foremost responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Syrians. I know you know of Serena Shim. She was the press TV reporter, Lebanese American, who was reporting from the Turkish border, I think in 2012, when Ain al-Arab or Kobani was under assault from ISIS. She reported from the border that—
I quit blaming Erdogan, the leader of Turkey. He doing what he supposed to fucking do. If Putin gonna keep showing this amount of weakness and Iran gonna keep showing this amount of weakness, please, this man playing for it all. This man that took Syria, he done rebuilt the Ottoman Empire. Are you kidding me? And Iran still ain't struck. He got NATO. He in NATO, so you better not touch him. But he can do all this nefarious ass shit and even attack U.S. allies. Turkey do that all the fucking time. You see? Everybody once said that he wasn't good at what he's doing. No, he is excellent at playing this game, the grand chess game. He's just proven it. And he's in NATO. So Putin, Iran, you better watch out unless you're willing to go all the way with him. You better stop playing game with Turkey, man. Turkey, like I told you, Turkey is in Africa causing havoc. Ethiopia is so pissed that Turkey now has gotten a water naval deal with Somalia. All that chaos. You think about what's all that chaos that's been going on in Somalia all these years. They've been causing that chaos. They have been the ones making sure it couldn't be governments in Somalia. Egypt has been behind that shit too. The bullshit going on in Sudan right now. That's them causing this confusion and this chaos in Africa.
World Food Organization trucks were being used to take in weapons and troops into Syria from Turkey. And then Turkish intelligence called her a spy, and she went on Press TV live, said that I'm scared. I've been accused of being of espionage, and I'm afraid. That very same day she was killed. Turkish intelligence murdered her in a car when a truck hit her car. So Netanyahu has succeeded in raising the black flags of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Damascus. And those who support Erdogan and his actions, they cannot hide behind these facts. Assad, those who say Assad killed hundreds of thousands of his own people, they are the ones who are supporting the people who actually carried out these atrocities.
These are facts that you have adduced, but there are other facts. The reality is now that the Palestinians have suffered a strategic defeat of almost incalculable magnitude. They are now isolated. The only people giving them weapons to resist were Iran, and the only people who were fighting as an organized army on their behalf.
Think about that. The Muslim world talking about Palestine, the Muslim world, billions of Muslims, they talking about Palestine. The only people who are arming the Palestinians who doing the fighting was Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, the Houthis is helping. We got to look at this. The shame that's going to be on the Muslim world forever after this. After we are witnessing the genocide of the babies, the innocent women, and we know their militaries are great. Egypt doing nothing. Saudi Arabia, billions in advanced weaponry doing nothing. But the ones who tried to do something, they coordinated with Israel and the U.S. to put an end to it.
Well, the Lebanese resistance. Now, as a result of what's happened, Iran cannot reach these people. They cannot be resupplied. They are in mortal danger of fatal, final defeat. Do you accept that, first of all? And then we'll go on to what could have been done to avoid this.
It is a very dangerous situation because we know that Erdogan has never been serious about the Palestinian cause. In fact, Erdogan has always tried to corrupt the Palestinian cause. He gives scholarships to Palestinians. He'd host leaders of the Palestinian movements in Turkey and give their family a very good life, and therefore he gained influence that way. But he never sent a single bullet to Gaza. He never sent a single bullet to the West Bank. He once said before Israel invaded Lebanon that if they attack Lebanon, we'll send troops there. He didn't send a bullet to Lebanon. And I should add, now that Syria has fallen, that Iran and Syria were supporting the West Bank. The Syrians were supporting the West Bank until now. So now the West Bank is going to have a much more difficult time protecting itself as these genocidal monsters seek to ethnically cleanse that territory. Hezbollah is in a much more difficult position. In fact, today, as I'm sure you know, Netanyahu went to the Golan. Not only did the Israeli regime move further into Syria today, but they also have been bombing key assets of Syria all day, destroying their key infrastructure. But what he said was really interesting. He said that because we weakened Hezbollah, we helped bring about the fall of Syria. So, and when he accepted the ceasefire, he said we have to deal with the so-called Iran threat. What was that threat? It's Syria. And immediately after the ceasefire, Erdogan, the traitor, invaded Syria. When Iran was distracted, when Hezbollah was focused on the south, because the ceasefire was not a real ceasefire. Every day the Israelis are killing the Lebanese. Yesterday, I think 4 were murdered. Today, 3 were murdered at least until this afternoon. The border between Palestine and Lebanon is very dangerous, the situation right now. So the treachery of Erdogan, I think, will be remembered in history. So yes, I agree. The situation for the Palestinian people is very dangerous right now. It's precarious. And I can't say it's been a catastrophic defeat, but without a doubt, the victory, the defeat of Israel is now, I think, an open question. Israel lost in Gaza, regardless of the genocide. It delegitimized itself in the eyes of the world, and it failed to capture it. It lost in Lebanon. It failed to capture Lebanon, and it exposed itself again as genocidal and weak in the face of Hezbollah. But now, after what Erdogan has done, the equation has changed. And this Israeli defeat is, I can't call it a defeat anymore. And the delegitimization of the Israeli regime, which I think is the biggest achievement of the last 14 months, the delegitimization in the eyes of the world, is now being forgotten. Because no one is, as you said a few minutes earlier, no one is talking about the ongoing Holocaust. As you and I are speaking, there's a Holocaust going on. Nothing has changed. They're slaughtering Palestinians day and night in Gaza. And I ask your viewers to constantly be active in the coming hours and days and keep sending out the message that there's a Holocaust going on. The Israeli regime has to be there. Its actions have to be remembered by people in the coming days and weeks, and the diligence.
This professor, come on, professor, stop it, professor. What the hell? You say you want us to do what? No, we want the Muslim world to step in and stop Israel. We can't. What do you want us to do, brother? I got you on my stream. I'm telling everybody, we need y'all to fight and quit letting those innocent Muslim women, children, and elderly people be mass murdered. Please stop letting Israel knock off one leader after the next, one city, one state. Stop it, Iran. You better stop it, because you're gonna have to fight for yourself now, just like Syria. Don't make Russia show you, Iran, that Russia not going, because when you corner it and you just having to, no, you have to do some preemptive things too, man. That's serious business, man. Putin thinking right now. Now, is you gonna fight?
Legitimization of the regime has to be maintained. But yes, I agree. This victory, because the Israelis had to achieve victory, otherwise it's a defeat. And until now, it was a defeat for Israel. But the last 10 days, thanks to the Erdogan-Netanyahu alliance, I can no longer say that.
Well, let me say what you're not able to say, or don't feel able to say. It's an Israeli victory. Israel has snatched victory out of the jaws of defeat, because all this talk of delegitimization and their name is blackened throughout the world and so on, that doesn't add up to a row of beans.
Come on, tell them.
Unless the people fighting the occupation are able to go on fighting it, it's a victory for the occupier. So that brings me to, well, let me in parenthesis ask you this. I asked it publicly today for the first time in 14 months. October the 7th now looks like a very bad idea. And it makes you wonder.
What did I say yesterday? What did I say on this live yesterday? Because it hit me at the same way. I said, wait a minute. Now, you have to fight for your freedom. But if y'all are not going to go all out, then what the hell are you doing? Because after October the 7th, Israel killed all of the leaders of Hamas. And what, 70,000 of their people, wounded 300,000 of their people. Israel killed the president of Iran. He killed them. They killed them. They killed them. Israel has wiped out Syria, and Syria has fallen. You know, it seems to be a big mistake if they wasn't going to go all out. And Iran better look, if you're going to just sit back and wait on your turn, and then it's going to be their mistake also.
Whose idea was it anyway? Because you can say that Israel paid a big price in soft power, paid a big price in its reputation and so on, but all the key players still support it, arm it, give weapons to it. And those that stand against them have now suffered a strategic defeat. Do you have a view on that?
I'm sure that the great martyr Yahya Sinwar never expected Erdogan to carry out this act of treachery at this point. In fact, as you know, Yahya Sinwar said very openly that he was against what was happening in Syria and that he saw Syria as a part of this axis of resistance. Who has more right to talk about Palestine, Yahya Sinwar or Erdogan, who's selling oil, cheap Baku, who's sending cheap Baku oil to Israel, who's been aiding the genocide for 14 months, who maintains diplomatic relations, who never once told Aliyev to stop selling oil, who continues to do indirect trade with the Israeli regime, and who now has brought the black flags to Damascus. I don't think Yahya Sinwar ever thought for a moment that this would happen under these circumstances. He couldn't even wait a few weeks to carry out his attack. So the Palestinians in Gaza, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, what could they do? They were in a concentration camp. The West Bank was being ethnically cleansed. East Jerusalem was being ethnically cleansed. I understand why they did it. And I don't think any of us can see the future. Hezbollah made the greatest sacrifices for the people of God.
Israel baited them in, man. That's what he said. Israel baited them in. It was an Israeli ploy. Israel played dead. Israel played like Israel was absolutely willing to let people get kidnapped and innocent people to get killed. For what they just did, they were willing for more of their people to die. They've killed Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. They've been trying to do that since the 80s, man. Killed all the leaders of Hamas once again. Killed the president of Iran, which was next in line to be the supreme leader. He was bigger than just being the president. The hell with being the president. He was finna be the supreme leader for maybe, next 20 to 30 years. Killed him. Now the crown jewel. They have taken Syria off the chessboard. Now they can do whatever they want in Lebanon and with the Palestinians. And the rest of the Muslim world not going to do shit but whine about it in the UN.
Gaza, because they did so willingly since October the 8th. But what else could Hezbollah do but stand with the people of Palestine and the people of Gaza? And they paid a huge price for their willing assistance to the people of Gaza. But they didn't foresee the betrayal of Erdogan, the treason that Erdogan carried out. The people of Turkey are supportive of the Palestinians. But Erdogan knows very well who his henchmen are. He knows exactly who ISIS is. He is ISIS. He is Al-Qaeda because he helped them grow. He allowed them to destroy Syria and Iraq. He promoted them.
Hurt right now, y'all.
And now and if he is such a moral man, and he and his foreign minister, another criminal,
Syria from Iran.
If they are so moral, why did they want to mend relations with President Assad? If President Assad is such a monster, why were they willing to turn around and normalize with Syria?
See, Iran tricked him right there. He knew Assad wasn't going to want to meet with him. He was just saying, I have no choice now because you didn't want to listen. That make it even easier for him to get away with. Because he's telling the world, I tried to meet with Assad 3 or 4 different times to settle this. He blew me off. He brushed me off. Oh, he thought he was big and bad because he had Russia and Iran on his side. That's serious business. And Iran said he hoped that the Islamists would punish him when they got their hands on him. That's why Assad got up out of there, because they already knew he was going to get done like Gaddafi if he didn't get the hell up out of Damascus.
And then again, turn around later and overthrow Syria. What morality is that? He has no principles whatsoever. So how could Yahya Sinwar, who led that operation, be blamed for the criminal behavior of the Erdogan regime and his henchmen? I cannot blame Hamas or Islamic Jihad for what they did.
Yeah. Finally, Professor, it's a difficult question to ask. You might find it difficult to answer. You have concentrated on damning Erdogan, and very few watching will disagree with you. But why did Iran not see this coming? Iran is or was everywhere in Syria. They had the most intensive understanding of the situation in Syria. Why did they not see this coming? Why did they not take steps to preclude it?
I don't want to blame President Assad now that this is over. It's easy to blame people afterwards. It was a very critical situation. But a number of things happened. First of all, the Syrian government decreased Iran's presence in Syria after the peace in Idlib. And Iran, by the way, was not...
The Arabs, they rocked them to sleep. They rocked Putin and Iran to sleep. All of that Saudi Arabia, Iran peace, BS with China. I should have knew that Saudi Arabia didn't want no goddamn peace. And when they backed out of the BRICS meeting, they should have said, hold on, Saudi Arabia, I thought you wanted to join BRICS. No. You see, when they said, okay, Saudi Arabia and Iran, we're going to be nice, you know, we're going to come together for the first time in a long time. The United Arab Emirates, Qatar, all these Arab nations talking to Iran and going to see Putin, they let their guard down. They start removing hardware, removing generals, removing soldiers from Syria. Say, hey, you don't need all that there, Iran. Hey, didn't we sign a peace agreement? Or are you trying to rule over the Arabs? Then Iran trying to show, no, I'm doing nothing nefarious. I'm going to stick to some guidelines, start removing his people, you know, and that's serious business. It was a trap. The Arabs never gave a damn about no peace with Iran. They want to do business with Russia, but they don't want Russia so powerful in the Middle East. It was all a trick and a scam, and Iran and Russia got to understand that.
Was opposed to this. The Russians wanted this peace. Iran felt that Idlib would become a crisis later on. But the Syrian government wanted rapprochement with Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates.
The Arabs.
And they distanced themselves from Iran. And the Iranian footprint in Israel, as in Palestine, in Syria, as they say.
Yeah. And that's where it all fell apart. At the end of the day, the Arabs in Syria sold Iran out, made deals with ISIS. The generals, those who were the bosses of the army, made deals with the Arabs. Sold their leader out, Bashar al-Assad. And they let Assad get away. That's because the Russians had him secure. But if they could have got their hands on him, they would have gave Assad to the head choppers. But Iran had no choice because they was like, okay, this is an Arab decision. Even though it was going to have them lose everything they had set up, they had no choice because any force that they sent, they definitely would have looked like an invader, and it would have ruined all of the work they had been trying to do with the Arab community.
Was decreased. So Iran had far few people in Syria over the past 3-4 years than before. The second issue is, and you alluded to that, is that the problem lied with the fact that the United States emptied Syria. They were stealing the oil and the agricultural products from the northeast of the country, and they used the genocidal sanctions, the Caesar sanctions, to starve the people. A general in the Syrian army was earning $40 a month, and these Al-Qaeda terrorists were earning up to $2,000 a month.
That was the beginning of the end.
So when they...
That's the beginning of the end. That's the math. You got to understand right there. That's where the loyalty lied, and their wallets at the end of the day. The U.S. crushed Syria's economic ability by stealing their oil. This wasn't just about oil. It was to make sure he wasn't going to be able to pay his soldiers, pay his generals, pay the people he needed to pay. When the time came for them to bribe these people, the people was like, I'm making $40. I'm a general. Al-Qaeda getting $2,000 a month. Now, you see, that's crazy to me that they didn't better that situation. And I swear to God, when the head choppers started going off in Syria a few days ago, I had seen in an interview Syria was saying that they was finna pay the soldiers more. Man, it's too damn late, boy. You finished.
The economy was emptied. The army was weak. And then social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they and the Arabic media, these despots in the region, and the Western media, all of them carried out a very effective psychological warfare campaign against the Syrians when this started. So the Syrian army wasn't able to defend itself.
But watch.
And of course, Hezbollah.
All of these head choppers, they finna reroute these head choppers to Africa. Mark my word. They finna send these head choppers to Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. They finna try to go get those states back. But as long as they fight, Putin gonna stand with them. And they're gonna fight. They're not gonna do what Syria just did. So that's what's next. Because after they kill Gaddafi and then start selling black people on the market in Libya, that's when they went deep into Africa. You get your Boko Haram, your Al-Shabaab. That is these head choppers right here going to Africa and telling them, you under us now. Now let's rape these women. These are our concubines. Let's conquer this territory on behalf of the caliphate. That's serious business. Syria had a bunch of advanced weapons. I just told y'all that. We're going to keep our eye on this shit because they don't just do one thing. This has to do with everything all over the battlefield.
Because as Netanyahu himself said, was back in Lebanon, they were hurt and they were prepared. They were prepared to fight for the South. So they weren't in Syria. The Iranians didn't have much of a presence. And then when this attack started, Iran had to mobilize, and they did start bringing people in. A significant number of people were in Damascus. But, and this I don't want to blame President Assad, but he changed his position twice over the last 2-3 days. The Iranians were willing to come in, just like in 2013. Remember, Iran did not enter, nor did Hezbollah until 2013. After tens of thousands of foreign fighters were brought into Syria by Erdogan and Western intelligence agencies and with funding from these despots in the Persian Gulf. The Iranians were prepared. They told him so, that they were prepared to fight against Al-Qaeda. He changed his position, and the timing, there was very little time. Unless President Assad was very firm that, yes, come in, and the army will cooperate with you, Iran could not go into Syria and fight on its own without the support of the president and the government. It would fail. It would be a catastrophe. So the Iranians came in, and I don't want to go into great detail. I don't know everything now, but I know some of what happened. But President Assad for whatever reason, people were giving him different information. Perhaps people were calling him from abroad. At one point, he said, "I'll leave." At one point, he said, "I'll stand," and then he said, "I'll leave." But the Iranians cannot fight in another country without the full support of the president of that country. But anyway, I don't blame him because the situation was critical. I don't know the circumstances, but the treason came from the north. This was about more than just Syria. And have no doubt that this will cause instability across Asia. There are up to 5,000 Chinese fighters in Syria, thousands from Central Asia, especially Uzbekistan. And these people will destabilize much of Asia if they can. They're right now euphoric. They're drunk in their victory, and they will be a danger in future. Erdogan has created a monster that can destabilize much of Asia, and I think the Americans want that. But of course, this is not going to benefit the West.
Yeah.
This instability is not going to benefit the region either. No one is going to go unscathed. Only two people benefit. One is Erdogan and one is Netanyahu. And these two men are very similar. Erdogan does it for himself, not for Turkey. And Netanyahu does it for himself and not his Zionist colleagues and the other Zionist colonizers. But in any case, I think that Al-Qaeda will ultimately fail. It's going to be a very big burden on the people of Turkey. It's going to destabilize the region. And I think that Erdogan, things are very different today, George, from what it was in 2011, 12, 13. I think you know this better, much better than I. People are much more awake today to the reality of what's going on in our region than back then. Back then, there were a few lone voices telling people what was going on, and most did not believe it. Now everyone knows what Jake Sullivan said. Now everyone knows what Kerry said. Now everyone knows what the Defense Intelligence Agency said, what General Michael Flynn said on Al Jazeera. Everyone knows that the CIA, Israel, and Erdogan are in bed together, and that Erdogan sacrificed the people of Palestine. And we will see in the weeks and months ahead, as I think you alluded to at the beginning of the show, that Erdogan and Al-Qaeda will do nothing to harm the Israeli regime.
I infer then your answer to my next question, but let me ask it anyway. It's my final one, and I'm grateful for your time. There are people, I don't know enough about it to have a view myself, but there are people who do know a lot about it, who think that the change of president in Iran has changed, at least, if not the political line, then at least the enthusiasm for the political line, the resolve to enforce the political line. Is there anything in that, in your view?
I understand that position. I think that there are some people in the current administration that are naive about the United States, who think that if we show a willingness to compromise, that the Americans will compromise. I don't believe that is the case. I believe that the Americans will, as always, they'll misinterpret this as a sign of weakness, and they'll become more aggressive. That is what history has told us. That is what happened after the nuclear deal. That is what happened after when we were named the axis of evil. There are hosts of instances where the Iranians showed goodwill and they were slapped, and their hands were slapped by the Americans. But I don't believe that the policy of Iran has changed towards the Palestinian people or towards Syria. The Iranians were prepared to move in. The Iranians did send a large number of advisors. They were in Damascus, and troops under Iranian supervision were in Damascus and in the areas around that. They had come in from abroad. But, as I said, they needed the full consent and support of the president, and thus the cooperation of the Syrian Arab Army, in order to begin fighting. So Iran was prepared to make sacrifices. But if the Syrian president was not committed, and if the Syrian army was not committed, then it would have been a failure, and you would have had a lot of dead Iranians and forces from Iraq and Lebanon and Afghanistan, and people would say, why did that happen? So I don't believe that Iran's general policy has changed. I don't believe the Iranian president has these views, but I do believe that there are people in the administration who are naive about the United States, and perhaps some of their views have emboldened the Americans and their allies, unfortunately. But policy has not changed in Tehran.
Professor, thank you as always for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned, everyone. We've got the one and only Scott Ritter coming up later, but not on YouTube, because YouTube tried to dictate to us who we could have as our guests and named Scott Ritter as an unacceptable guest. We have no choice but to
This is Israel already blowing everything up.
As expected, Israel began to invade Syrian territory out the Golan, carrying out several bombings at once following Syria fall into the hands of proxy wars, with no way to defend itself. Today, December 8, 2024, Syrian media documented images and reported that Israeli planes bombed which Israel said were weapon sites and depots, hitting several parts of southern Syria amidst the dramatic events in Syria with great concern.
Those weapons, crazy.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has decided to resign from the presidency and leave Syria, while calling for a peaceful transfer of power. Syria fell into the hands of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS, led by al-Jilani, where he joined al-Qaeda in 2003, establishing Jabhat al-Nusra during the rebellion against Syria in 2011. Over time, he changed the name of his group to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, now acting as a pseudo-government in the northwestern region of Syria. However, Israeli planes and tanks began to enter before one day of the fall of Damascus. About 4 Israeli Air Force warplanes were seen crossing Bekaa Valley, Lebanon towards Syria, and then causing several explosions in southern Syria. Explosions from aerial bombardments were reportedly heard in Kazioun mountain area, and Meza Air Base in western Damascus was targeted and destroyed an arsenal containing strategic weapons belonging to Syrian armed forces, according to Israeli reports.
Israel not letting them keep those weapons.
Meanwhile, Kalkala Air Base in Suwaida, in Dara Governorate, not far from the Israeli border, was also targeted by heavy bombardment, as shown in the footage. Israel claims that the bombing was to prevent advanced equipment from falling into the hands of Syrian rebels. But it is worth noting, it seems that in the long term, about 95% of Syrians and rebels will be dreaming of the old days, the effects after they attempted to fall Assad.
أربع طائرات
noting that he has left the country. This, as the rebranded version of Al Qaeda, is just a couple of weeks into its offensive that has swept across the country and even entered Damascus. Now we're looking at what comes next for Syria. Are they going to form some sort of transitional government? What is that going to look like with all of the different warring factions in the country, as Israel is already getting its piece by expanding its illegal occupation of Syria, ramping up its strikes, targeting what remains of the Syrian government and their military, and more. We got into all of the latest in a very special interview. I know that many of you who follow my channel also follow Kevork Almasian of Syriana Analysis. This was actually his first interview after the fall of Assad. We took a look at what this means for the country and also what this means for the entire region. So without further ado, let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Kevork Almasian, a geopolitical analyst and host of Syriana Analysis. Kevork, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
With pleasure. It's a pleasure to share my perspective about what's happening in Syria now.
Oh, well, it's great to have you on the show, especially right now. I know that we're having this conversation as we now know that Bashar al-Assad is no longer the president of Syria and has left the country. And that's according to not just anonymous officials, but also notably a statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry, which said in the statement that he chose a peaceful transition of power. Now, I was incredibly shocked by this news, right? Everything that Syria has gone through in the last 13 years, it has been shocking to watch this rebranded version of Al Qaeda sweep to, I guess, a form of power and to watch Syrian troops stand down. Will you start by giving me your reaction to the latest?
So when the HTS started the offensive on Aleppo, for me, it was quite clear that the Syrian army strength was enough to repel such attacks. And I have been reporting about it that the Jolani army will attack on Aleppo way before the attack happened. So it was anticipated. However, the nature of the attack and the way the Syrian army retreated, it gave us two impressions. The first one was the attack was very sophisticated and it had multifaceted strategies and military tactics in terms of the military equipment, but also the jamming, technological jamming, the drones that were used against the Syrian army positions. So we got the impression that the army was overwhelmed and they had to redeploy and retreat from Aleppo to northern Hama. And it also, the attitude of the Syrian army gave us again an impression that they want to defend Hama because this was the red line that they have set up. And then a decision has been made on a higher level in the Syrian army, probably by the president himself, that they have to retreat to Homs. And the people, those who understand Syria well, we knew that if Homs falls, Assad will be gone in a matter of few days maximum. Because Homs is the city which connects the different governorates of Syria together. It has different intersections there. And also it's the city which connects Damascus to the coastal area, from which also Syria imports its energy needs through Iran. So without an energy, you cannot also operate your military, you're done. So on the second and the third day of this war in Homs, another decision has been given for the army to retreat without fighting. So from the city, the military received orders to retreat and the militants occupied the city and they called it liberated. And they started moving to Damascus, and also from the south, from Daraa, the other militants also started moving to Damascus without any resistance. So they were basically walking on feet and on some pickup trucks, and they were going to Damascus without resistance. And the government said and alleged that they have to regroup around Damascus, and Damascus is protected. But then when the militants arrived to the, let's say, the suburbs of Damascus, another decision has been given to the Syrian army to, again, pull down their arms, dress civilian clothing, basically, and just give up. So this is a clear indication that there was a deal under the table, and the Syrian army is not fighting by orders of higher level, not because in the press and some of the pundits say that the Syrian army was not willing to fight, and if they are not willing to fight, then why would the allies come and also support the Syrian government? But that's not the case. The Syrian army was fighting in Homs and in Hama in the suburbs, and they were determined to push back. But when the decision was made, the army obeys the superior decision and they retreated. So this was clear indication that Assad made a deal with regional and international powers, probably during his last visit to Moscow, which was not the last Friday, but the previous Friday, when he met with President Putin secretly in an unannounced visit. Probably there was something that has been cooked between Syria and Russia probably told Assad that it's time for a compromise and a deal, and we will secure and guarantee the unity of Syria or the sovereignty with our allies. And the allies are Turkey, Russia, the Arabic countries, but now we have also Israel intervening in this conflict. I think what happened was shocking to many, many Syrians, that the way that the cities were given up basically to the militants, especially for the people who supported Assad, and they believed that the army will defend them, but then the militants swept into the cities without any resistance. So this was a major shock factor for the people who support Assad. And now they see this as like giving up on the cause or treasonous act by Assad himself, especially if the reports are accurate that he left the country, and something that Lavrov also, as you mentioned, confirmed, that he's outside of Syria. And this is not the conclusion, I believe, that many Syrians wanted for. However, we have now a new reality, a new status quo that people have to respect and participate in this transition power into a new Syria. Hopefully that would be, as people wish, democratic Syria. But at the same time, you follow also me for a long time, Rachel. My major concern from this foreign-backed insurgency was that Syria will lose its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and these militants are basically, without the outside support, they cannot really proceed and continue and advance in Syria. And now that they occupy Damascus and the rest of the cities, the amount of, let's say, revengeful acts from them is very minimum. They haven't killed, let's say, senior officials or journalists or people who were supporting the government. But I still believe that due to the foreign funding of these groups, any sort of future government cannot really be expected to be fully independent, especially if Syria wants to preserve its role in the region as a power which can have a resistance role against the US hegemony. I think that with Assad leaving power, Syria will definitely become a pro-American state. And this also means the end of what is called the axis of resistance in the region.
Yeah, and I know it's just, anyways, going back to that, the shock there, right, and how we led up to this point. And as you noted there, I mean, there's so much that Syria has gone through over the years. It's not as if everything was fine and this just happened overnight. You've had years of sanctions, years of various agreements. And I did think it was interesting too, going back to the question of kind of, was there a deal made of some sort? And in the last 2 weeks, we've seen the rise of this latest edition of Al-Qaeda called HTS that spread outside of Idlib, and its leader, Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani. And all of a sudden, they're trying to rebrand themselves as diversity friendly and moderate. And you've got the US openly attacking Iraqi militias. You've got Israel also carrying out a number of strikes, continuing to do so today, further expanding their illegal occupation of Syria, their invasion into the country. And now that Jolani is at the forefront of this kind of transitional government that they're talking about forming, I just can't see a way in which this is easy and we magically have some sort of new government that forms, given all of the different warring factions, given the fact that you have both Israel and Turkey that have interest in Syria, that want that land. You also have the US-backed Kurds. So how do you see kind of the different factions and where Syria stands today in this new reality?
If the Syrian opposition groups are going to continue with the same mentality, which means that when they were in the exile and they formed different opposition political groups, and also on the ground they have formed different military groups, and everyone has a different allegiance to a different country because of the funding, then this is going to end up in a failure. So from my new position, let's say, now I'm considered the opposition to the current to the current rule in Damascus. I will not do the same thing that they do, which is like trying to stop the wheel of let's say economic development in the country, or just trying to absurdly become an opposition just for the sake of being an opposition. And because nowadays the meaning of opposition has become also distorted. The opposition has to be patriotic and caring about the people and the country. And so if there is anything from my side that I could help, I will be there. But if we judge from their previous how they formed their opposition groups, both politically and militarily, I think Turkey will have its wing in the government, definitely. The Saudis will have their wing with the Emiratis in the government. The French will have their wing in the government. Americans will have their wing in the government, and Israel will have its wing in the government. At least these countries will definitely have their assets in the government. Therefore, we will see probably a government that is non-functional because of the conflict of interest of these powers. Therefore, my humble advice would be for the politicians who are going to build the new Syria is to try to detach themselves as much as possible from foreign funding and foreign leverage, because these countries do not really care about the Syrian people. They have their geopolitical interests in the country. And this is where I come from. My opposition to their revolution was that they are pursuing foreign interests in the country, basically Saudi, Qatari, Turkish, American, and Israeli. And I was correct. And you can see nowadays that all these powers are in Syria guiding these opposition groups to go to Damascus. Therefore, expecting Syria to stay independent and sovereign, it's, in my opinion, a wishful thinking. It is possible probably on the longer run, but maybe, you know, sometimes I think about such events from historical perspective, and I say, maybe, just maybe, some people have to go through some experiences to learn from it and to get matured in order to understand how to build a state and a country and preserve its sovereignty. And if they don't do that, then they will perish. Any people around the world who cannot really become mature enough to build a state institution and keep its country sovereign, they will lose as a country and as a territorial integrity, like we see nowadays in Ukraine, for example, like we saw in Georgia, like we're seeing in Armenia. They're ceding territories or losing territories. This is a very plausible and possible scenario if the Syrian people and the Syrian oppositionists now who are in charge of the country, if they don't mature and learn quick how to manage state affairs, I think this could end up in a really bad way. I don't hope that. I will not work for that outcome because my intentions are very clear. I want for my people to live in dignity and have a better life, probably without sanctions, and having access to their natural resources and building state institutions, schools, education, development. So this is the area which I find myself having a mutual ground with them if they have the good intentions. But my warning for them is always the same. None of these countries supporting them have the best interests of the Syrian people in their heart.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And that's also, I mean, the US loves to do it that way, right? They put all of these sanctions on a country. And then when the country does what they want, when a leader is overthrown and there's a change in government, then the US comes in and says, okay, we'll lift the sanctions. We'll give you plenty of foreign aid as long as you're acting the way that we want you to. And it just never is truly in the best interest of the people on the ground. Now, when it comes to kind of where the region goes from here, right? Kind of taking a step back and looking at how this has an effect on Palestine and on the ongoing Palestinian cause. I mean, we think of the fact that I know that there was a recent ceasefire deal made between Israel and Hezbollah just a couple of weeks ago, but Israel's eye has continued to be on Syria, continued to be on those supply lines and on the aid that Syria has provided to Hezbollah and to other members of the resistance. So how do you view the situation that the Palestinians are currently in? Is there any chance that Israel, I guess, backs off from Gaza in any way because now they've gotten what they wanted in Syria and they're turning their attention there?
Benjamin Netanyahu just posted a video from the Golan Heights. He was celebrating the removal of Assad and says that finally a threat from our border is gone. I think we have to be honest with our respected audience and tell them the facts. The axis of resistance is going to crumble. It's going to disintegrate. And this has started in Gaza. Israel completely destroyed Gaza. There is no standing building there. So even though there are Palestinians living in this place, but they have basically committed a genocide because they have destroyed this Palestinian people as an ethnic group and a religious group in part or in whole. So the destruction of the Palestinian people in Gaza is not only about killing, because people really do not know the definition of genocide. The genocide is not to kill everyone in the Palestinians. If you kill them in part or in whole, meaning that you turn the place that they live in into a hell, a place where they can't live and continue having any future prospect, anything, any hope, you already committed the genocide. And if you had the intention of killing the people based on their ethnicity and religion, that's a genocide. And I think the Palestinian situation now is they are weaker than they used to be before October 7th. So Hezbollah is also weaker than before October 7th. Those are facts. And the assassination of the entire leadership of Hezbollah, including the Secretary General. Now, maybe people in Lebanon still denying the realities, and I understand, because psychologically it's difficult to accept this bitter reality, but there is going to be a chilling moment for them to realize that they have become like orphans, because Nasrallah for them was like a father figure, and he was the one who restored their dignity after the liberation of Lebanon in 2000 and 2006. And he was the one who created deterrence against Israel. And he was the one who went to Syria to fight against these terrorist groups in order to protect the borders of Lebanon. So with the killing of the entire leadership of Hezbollah, I truly believe that replacing the leadership, it's going to be a very, very hard mission. It's not impossible, but it's going to be extremely difficult. And history sometimes gives you a leader on a golden plate, and you have to appreciate it and enjoy it. But when you lose it, replacing him is going to be very difficult. Not all time great leaders come to some countries. And now that Syria has also crumbled, all the supply chains for Hezbollah will be cut, definitely 100%. The Americans, the Turks, and the Israelis, Saudis, Emiratis, they're not going to allow for existence of any supply chains for Hezbollah in Syria, which means that Hezbollah will become a local player again instead of being a regional player in the region, having an access in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. It's going to be local and only caring about the protection of their, let's say, group, the Shia Muslims in Lebanon. So their power will be degraded, and they will not have the capacity to go to war, basically, against Israel, because there is no longer a supply chain. I mean, if Syria is gone, Hezbollah will be cut from Iran, will be cut from Iraq, will be cut from the rest of the Middle East. So this basically means with weaker Palestine and weaker Hezbollah, and Syria disappeared from this equation, the axis of resistance is gone. And I know that some pundits say, no, it's possible. It's logically and geographically, it's not possible. And nobody should expect for HTS, which has lots of grievances with Hezbollah, to allow them to rearm and regroup and get any sort of assistance from Syria any longer. And therefore, this is something that I would like to mention because it's important. The Palestinians who are celebrating the occupation of Syria, which they call it liberation, I think they have to see this from the geopolitical lens. And if they are honest with themselves and see it from a geopolitical lens, they will realize that their Palestine is in the worst shape possible. The Palestine cause is in the worst shape possible. And from now on, I think Israel will have the upper hand over the Palestinians, and they will not be able to continue armed struggle against. Maybe they don't want it. I'm not judging them if they don't want it, but if they want to continue armed struggle, this is going to be over. The struggle is only going to be peaceful or diplomatic, and I don't think that Israel really is afraid of diplomatic and political struggle, to be blunt.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me, as you were mentioning it there, the last point I wanted to make was the fact that, I see these people on social media and they are celebrating the downfall of Assad, right? They clearly didn't like him. They call him a dictator. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, you don't have to like Assad. You don't have to agree with him. But have you not learned from Iraq, from Libya, from other places where there was one main government? And I know even in Syria, obviously going back to the warring factions, years of war that have harmed this country and obviously its people. But I just don't understand how people can celebrate today and act as if the Syrian people are in for a world of peace and democracy and freedom. What do you make finally of the reactions that you've seen, especially on social media from kind of around the world?
We are being told that history repeats itself, but that's not true. It's the people who do not learn from historical cycles and historical mistakes. I think people have the right to oppose Assad, and they have all the right to dislike his ruling system, and they have the right to direct their criticism. And I truly believe in that type of criticism. But allowing the US, Israel, Turkey, Saudi Arabia to become your basic your sponsor to remove Assad from power, this is where I consider that this is no longer about an opposition against the government, but rather it's a foreign interference for the sake of converting Syria into a satellite state. And this was my major argument from the beginning. This is why I opposed this so-called revolution, because for me it was clear that no country funnels tens of billions of dollars into Syria to establish democracy. If there is no financial reasons or geopolitical reasons, you will not invest this much, right? But some people say that all these things are fantasies, despite the fact that they are documented with videos and documents and leaked emails and memos and everything we have in our hands nowadays, right? That's why I said maybe, just maybe, some people have to go through this misery and experience by itself in order to learn from it and mature. But the situation in Iraq and Libya and other places which lived such regime change wars and coups, basically, the situation is not better at the current moment. And in terms of the position of these countries geopolitically, their independence and their reach to the national resources, right? Therefore, I don't have the illusions nowadays to come and say that this situation is going to end up in a different way. I'm hopeful. I would really love to see that. But is it going to happen? I think that's a wishful thinking, and it needs lots of work, and lots of people have to fall into the same mistake over and over again. And if the regional countries were too, I don't think that they have the good intentions to let such mistakes pass by without capitalizing on it and using it for their best interests. Therefore, I think that Syria has become an arena now for Saudis and the Emiratis to have influence in the south, and the Israelis. and the Americans and the Turks from the north. And now Trump is going to come to power and he will say, now I can withdraw my forces from Syria, and they strike a deal with Turkey and they just divide Syria into different sphere of influence, or they would divide Syria geographically. I hope I'm wrong. Really, I really hope that I'm wrong, but this is how I see things at the current moment.
Yeah, certainly a lot at stake here all around. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down and to explain and give context to all of the latest here. Kaburik Almasian, a geopolitical analyst and host of Syriana Analysis. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today is December 8th, 2024. The Syrian government has reportedly collapsed in Damascus. This is after days of the Syrian Arab Army withdrawing from territory that it had held for years following the Russian intervention, the freezing of the conflict. The conflict was frozen. U.S. forces in eastern Syria, Turkish forces occupying northern Syria. It was frozen with the understanding that this would all move toward eventual peace, some sort of resolution and peace. But in reality, and this is the reality of any sort of agreement made with the collective West, freezing a conflict is only going to give the collective West time to rearm, regroup, and relaunch hostilities. This is exactly what has happened. The Syrian Arab Army fought heroically to retake territory, major cities, Hama, Homs, Aleppo, Palmyra, areas in the south toward the border with Jordan. But they were a spent force. The conflict was frozen, and apparently nothing was done to even sustain Syria's fighting capacity, let alone expand it. And this is not necessarily the Syrian Arab Army's fault or even the Syrian government's fault. I want to play this clip of Dana Stroll of the U.S. Department of Defense at a talk at the U.S. government and arms industry funded think tank CSIS, and she explained exactly why the U.S. was occupying eastern Syria, what the purpose of it all was. Let's listen.
The United States still had compelling forms of leverage on the table to shape an outcome that was more conducive and protective of U.S. interests. And we identified four. So the first one was the 1/3 of Syrian territory that was owned via the U.S. military with its local partner, the Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, this was a light footprint on the U.S. military, only about 1,000 troops over the course of the Syria Study Group's report. And then the tens of thousands of forces, both Kurdish and Arab, under the Syrian Democratic Forces. And that 1/3 of Syria is the resource-rich, it's the economic powerhouse of Syria. So where the hydrocarbons are, which obviously is very much in the public debate here in Washington these days, as well as the agricultural powerhouse. But we argued that it wasn't just about this 1/3 of Syrian territory that the U.S. military and our military presence owned, both to fight ISIS and also as leverage for affecting the overall political process for the broader Syrian conflict. There were three other areas of leverage. One is political and diplomatic isolation of the Assad regime. This is, in our assessment, one of Russia's goals in the Middle East is the propaganda win for Russia of rehabilitating Assad on the international stage, of basically forcing the international community to normalize him and welcome him back in without any behavioral changes. So holding the line on diplomatic isolation, preventing embassies from going back into Damascus. Two is the economic sanctions architecture. So some of this is part of the maximum pressure campaign of the Trump administration on Iran, but there's a whole suite of both executive and congressional sanctions on Syria and Bashar al-Assad, both for human rights abuses in Syria and to the backers of Assad for their activities in support of him in Syria. And three was reconstruction aid. So the United States remains the overall largest single donor of humanitarian aid to Syrians both inside Syria and refugees outside of Syria. And there was some stabilization assistance in the part of Syria that was liberated from ISIS and controlled via the Syrian Democratic Forces in northern eastern Syria. The rest of Syria, though, is rubble. And what the Russians want and what Assad wants is economic reconstruction. And that is something that the United States can basically hold a card on via the international financial institutions and our cooperation with the Europeans. So we argue that absent behavioral changes by the Assad regime, we should hold the line on preventing reconstruction aid and technical expertise from going back into Syria.
So basically, she's admitting that the whole point of the U.S. staying in eastern Syria was not to work out some sort of peace agreement with the Syrian government or with Russia or Iran. It was to maintain pressure on Syria, to freeze and starve the Syrian people into submission, to hollow out the economy, to prevent reconstruction, to prolong human suffering, to perpetuate this ongoing crime against humanity that the U.S. has been in the process of committing all across the Middle East, including in Syria, until Syria finally collapsed. And that appears to be what has finally happened. Now, this brings us to the United States' larger global strategy. It is to overextend not just Syria, not to hollow out and collapse Syria, but this was part of a wider strategy to overextend and collapse the Russian Federation. And this all goes back to this 2019 paper published by the RAND Corporation literally titled, Extending Russia, Competing from Advantageous Ground. And if you look at the table of contents, it spells it out very clearly where the United States was going to light geopolitical fires, force Russia to invest, and hopefully overextend it, precipitating a Soviet Union-style collapse. Measure 1, provide lethal aid to Ukraine. We can see where this has led Russia in terms of its special military operation, now spanning 3 years. Measure 2, increase support to the Syrian rebels. Measure 3, promote regime change in Belarus. Measure 4, exploit tensions in the South Caucasus, where the U.S. is right now backing violent protesters trying to overthrow the government of Georgia. Measure 5, reduce Russian influence in Central Asia. Measure 6, challenge Russian presence in Moldova. And as you can see, Russia is attempting to address all of these areas. But if they were to overcommit in one of these areas, it might cost them in all of these areas. And so they are forced to look into disposition, the true disposition of their forces, what they have available to invest, and where they need to invest it. They need to prioritize it. It may not necessarily be realistic for them to commit to all of these areas where the U.S. is attempting to overextend Russia. They felt that committing too much to Syria, leave them vulnerable, and possibly cost them in Ukraine, they would make the decision to cut Syria loose. The same goes for Iran, for that matter. We have to understand how precarious the state Syria was left in and the inability of anything being able to be done about it. We just listened to Dana Stroll from the U.S. Department of Defense explain how the U.S. was deliberately strangling Syria economically. There are limits to what Russia, Iran, China, and the rest of the multipolar world can do. People say, where is China? China, despite being accused by the U.S. of being a global threat, it literally lacks the ability to project military power around the globe. Its military is built up and designed specifically to defend Chinese territory. In order to build the capabilities required to project military power around the globe, it would require years and years of investment. People take for granted America's ability to do this. That is a capability they built up over decades and decades, and we can see how it has left them, in a sense, overextended and vulnerable. So please keep this bigger picture in mind. When looking at the collapse of Syria, understand that this is one battle within a much larger war. You have to remember that, and you have to remember there's nothing final about the collapse of Syria. Yes, the current government is gone, is unlikely to ever come back, but the idea of a sovereign Syrian state, perhaps with a government even better, with prospects better than the Syria that we saw leading up to this collapse, could emerge. We remember Russia having to make a very difficult decision in 2011 not to come to the aid of Libya, because at that time they were not prepared or able to. They would have overextended themselves. They are, however, involved in Libya right now. They're involved in a lot of areas they weren't able to involve themselves in before. But again, this all contributes to limits to what they are able to do. And those limits were reached in Syria and apparently for Iran too. So we have to keep in mind, these are not all powerful nations. Russia is not all powerful. If America, with all of its wealth and power and its military spanning the globe, has limits to its power, so does Russia, so does China, so does Iran. We have to recognize that, be realistic about it. We have to understand that a battle lost is not a war lost, and you have to stay focused on the bigger picture. Now, one thing I will say, as I go to look at the map, you will notice that the information space is 100% monopolized by the US. That is their superpower. Their military and industrial power is in irreversible decline, but their ability to politically capture other nations, to commandeer and control a targeted nation's information space, move in and co-opt its education system, to infiltrate and take over its political system. This is America's superweapon. This is something that I have been writing about and doing videos about for years and years. I have tried to raise awareness of the imperative of defending a nation's information space. The final result of failing to protect your nation's information space is this: your country overrun by US-backed opposition groups, by US-backed and armed terrorists, your nation reduced to rubble, your country essentially, for all intents and purposes, erased off the map. The United States did this, not necessarily without firing a single shot, but with minimum involvement by its US military. Yes, its military is occupying eastern Syria and strangling Syria economically. But before they even invaded, they had already infiltrated and overrun Syrian society through information space, through the education system, through institutions, and the political system. Now, let's just go over very quickly what happened. This area up here, northern Syria, was occupied by Turkish troops. They were harboring US armed and backed terrorists there, literal terrorists listed by the US State Department as terrorists. Jabhat al-Nusra, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is what the group is calling itself now. All of these various incarnations of ISIS and Al-Qaeda were all being harbored by Turkey in the north and US forces, both east of the Euphrates River, but also down here near the Jordanian, Iraqi, Syrian border. There's a US base here, and the US was harboring terrorists listed by the State Department as terrorists here, and you can see how they have gone from this area. Let's look at the timeline. They went from this area that they had been controlling all of these years, and now they are converging on Damascus with other forces emanating out of Jordan. There are US military forces stationed in Jordan. They have for years and years been arming and training armies of terrorists who cross over to then go fight in Syria. You can see how the country was invaded. It's not an uprising, it was an invasion from north, from south, from east, all converging on Damascus. Now, this is what I'm talking about as far as dominating the information space. All of these icons represent claims made of terrorists capturing territory, controlling areas, capturing territory, the Syrian government deteriorating and collapsing. And if you click on any one of these, every single source is either the US-backed terrorists themselves or Western media. And you'll say, well, that's because it's a pro-Western map. Well, let's go to RT, Russian state media. Jihadists claim to take over power in Syria. Islamists entered Damascus and declared it free, asserting President Bashar al-Assad had fled the capital. So let's click on this story. According to Reuters, the Russian Federation has military forces in Syria. They are working directly with the Syrian government for years and years. How does Russia not know what is going on in Syria? Why are they citing Reuters? Why are they doing that? Why don't they know what is happening in Syria? Why doesn't RT have a liaison representing the forces in Syria that can tell them what is going on, either because they do and they don't want to admit what is going on and they want to kind of leak this information out via Western sources, or because they actually don't know what is going on in Syria. Russian forces almost certainly do know what's really going on, but RT does not know. And this is what I'm talking about. The Western media is an integral part of US intelligence, military, political operations all around the globe. They are directly involved in it. They know exactly what is going on, which is why they're able to fashion the best, most effective lies for any occasion. I do not understand how RT is organized. I have watched RT do this for years and years. Events taking place around the globe, and instead of doing independent research onto what is happening, sometimes they do, and they do a very good job at it, but oftentimes, if it's an area they're unfamiliar with or they don't usually cover, they defer to Western media coverage. What is the point of creating RT and reaching out to global audiences if all you're going to do is bolster and serve as an extension of Western propaganda? You're supposed to be confronting, exposing the propaganda, not enabling it. So this is the problem that I am talking about. Information space in the 21st century is as important for a nation to protect as a nation's land borders, shores, and airspace. Getting back to the map, people will say, okay, obviously these militants all advance from the borders. I mean, this pro-militant, pro-Western map shows that very clearly. They have a timeline feature. You can watch them emanating out of these US, Turkish, and Jordanian controlled areas converging on Damascus. How do we know that they're actually US-backed terrorists? Because Seymour Hersh, back in 2007, warned the world that the US was investing in supporting, bolstering extremists across the Middle East to overthrow both the Syrian and Iranian government. And it says here, to undermine Iran, which is predominantly Shia, the Bush administration has decided, in effect, to reconfigure its priorities in the Middle East. In Lebanon, the administration has cooperated with Saudi Arabia's government, which is Sunni, in clandestine operations that are intended to weaken Hezbollah, the Shia organization that is backed by Iran. The U.S. has also taken part in clandestine operations aimed at Iran and its ally Syria. A byproduct of these activities has been the bolstering of Sunni extremist groups that espouse a militant version of Islam and are hostile to America and sympathetic to Al-Qaeda, but only superficially. They are an extension of U.S. geopolitical interest around the globe. They are an extremist group created by the U.S. It poses as being adversarial toward the U.S. and also Israel, but in fact, it is benefiting from both U.S. and Israeli, also Turkish and Persian Gulf, money, arms, training, and all other forms of support. That was 2007. Come 2011, the so-called Arab Spring has sprung. And if you research the opposition groups involved carefully, you would have saw all of the US government money flowing to them. And eventually the New York Times admitted all of this by April, as a matter of fact. US groups helped nurture Arab uprisings. And it says down here, a number of the groups and individuals directly involved in the revolts and reforms sweeping the region received training and financing from groups like the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, and Freedom House. They say this is according to interviews in recent weeks and American diplomatic cables obtained by WikiLeaks. And they explain that all of those organizations they just listed are subsidiaries of the National Endowment for Democracy. And ultimately, all of this is being funded by the U.S. State Department. And they admit that this was not something that the U.S. co-opted in 2011. They were preparing for it years in advance. They said the opposition leaders attended a 2008 technology meeting in New York where they were taught to use social networking and mobile technologies to promote democracy. Among those sponsoring the meeting were Facebook, Google, MTV, Columbia Law School, and the U.S. State Department. And it wasn't just 2008, it was several years consecutively leading all the way up to 2011. So they prepared for years to create the political diversion, the armed violence they were also preparing would use as a pretext to begin the violent overthrow of all of these targeted nations, not just Syria. Come 2012, There was a leaked U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document. It was published by Judicial Watch. It is right here. The link will be in the video description below. And it says right here, the Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. And then it says down here, the West, which means the United States and Europe, Gulf countries, so the Persian Gulf states, U.S. allies, and Turkey support the opposition, while Russia, China, and Iran support the regime. They are admitting that ISIS and Al-Qaeda, because elsewhere in this document, they talk about the creation of a Salafist principality. Salafist is Islamic principality state, Islamic state, Salafist principality, Islamic state. They were talking about the creation of the Islamic State, and they said this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want, and they already identified the US, Europe, Turkey, Persian Gulf states as those supporting powers in order to isolate the Syrian regime. So we listened to Dana Stroll of the US Department of Defense say that that was the goal, that had been the goal, and at the time of that talk in 2019, that was still the goal, isolating, hollowing out, undermining, and finally collapsing the Syrian government. So that is what happened. And of course, this most recent offensive led by HTS, right down here, this is CNN interviewing the head of HTS. Abu Mohammed al-Jalani, the militant leader of the main group driving the country's armed opposition. This is who has overrun Syria. Well, here is HTS listed on the US State Department's list of foreign terrorist organizations. So this is a operation to undermine and overthrow the government of Syria, stretching all the way back to 2000. Seymour Hersh warned that under the Bush administration, this was taking shape. It continued under the Obama administration, where the U.S. engineered and launched the so-called Arab Spring, the political instability used as cover for the violent overthrow of many nations, including Syria. Militants that had already been years being prepared by the U.S. It continued under the Trump administration, who maintained the U.S. occupation of eastern Syria, specifically to strangle the Syrian government and its people out of existence, to allow these armed terrorists who now under the Biden administration have overrun Syria. So that is the complete arc of this story. So I want to get back to what I think the main problem still is. Even as the multipolar world grows economically, even militarily, surpassing the US and the rest of the collective West in so many ways, they still have not addressed collective security and internal security. While yes, Russia and China have protected their own respective information spaces very well, they have neglected creating any sort of way of aiding their allies and potential partners in protecting their own information space. And if your information space is undefended, the United States can not only monopolize it, they can use it to turn a nation's population against its own best interests, just as they have done in Ukraine. It is a slow festering inside a nation. The US spends millions and millions of dollars every single year, gathering just a few more people each year, working for them, and each person is working to expand their reach within the targeted country until it reaches critical mass. And you have a large segment of the population willing to vote in a US-backed opposition party into power, where they can then start making institutional changes within the country. And before you know it, political capture has taken place. And if voting cannot create an outcome favorable to US interests, they will just overthrow whatever government is standing in their way, which is what they did in Ukraine in 2014. And they have convinced the Ukrainian people to ignore their best interests, which would be neutrality, working with the West and with Russia, who had been their largest trading partner up until then. That would be their best interest. They have convinced the Ukrainian people to throw away their best interests and to collectively commit national suicide, which is what they are in the process of doing right now. They have now succeeded in convincing many people in Syria to do this. And they continue undermining nations all around the world. I live in Southeast Asia, in the Kingdom of Thailand. The US right now is at work, year after year after year, building up opposition groups, poisoning a growing percentage of the population against Thailand's own best interests, against their own history, their own culture, their own way of life, and their own indigenous institutions that have prevailed over centuries protecting the country. They are poisoning them against it, and eventually they will succeed, because having a better, more compelling story is not enough. The United States works in such a way when it is poisoning a population against itself. It is always offering people the path to least resistance. So people will see the promise of doing nothing, getting everything they want, or they will hear their own leaders saying, well, we have to work hard, we have to defend the country, we have to make sacrifices. Most people are going to choose getting something for nothing. Even if it's not true, they would rather believe that than commit to a life of hard work and sacrifice to continue building their country. The only way to stop this from poisoning your country is to get it out of your country. That is the only way, and that is exactly why Russia and China have cleared out their information space of U.S. interference, U.S. propaganda. That is why they did it, because it is always offering a path to less resistance that people will, just by the truth of human nature, that is what people will choose. Russia and China have successfully done this. They need to offer other nations a means of securing and defending their information space in the same way Russia and China offer weapons to all of these countries to defend their physical domains of air, land, and sea. Russia and China could offer nations like Thailand assistance in setting up an English language news agency like RT or like China's CGTN, so that Thailand can get their side of the story out to international audiences to better balance the information war that is constantly taking place. They could also assist nations like Thailand in creating their own social media platforms, because right now inside Thailand and many other countries around the world, most countries around the world, they depend on social media platforms based in the United States, controlled by Silicon Valley and their toxic relationship with the U.S. State Department and the special interests driving U.S. foreign policy. So if everyone in Thailand depends on US-based social media platforms, those US-based social media platforms are going to determine what information can and cannot be shared, what information is promoted, what other information is suppressed. And by doing so, you begin the process of shaping people's opinions, shaping their very values and sense of identity, and they shape it in such a way to serve US interests at the expense of this targeted nation's own actual best interests. The US also infiltrates a nation by creating all sorts of educational programs, targeting the educational system of that country. And they create entire pipelines to take young people, indoctrinate them, train them, give them internships, even send them to the United States or Europe, plug them into the personal and professional networks over there, so that when they return to their home country and they work their way into, say, the media, the legal system, the education system, they represent Western interest. And if they don't, they run the risk of being ostracized from these professional and personal networks the US deliberately plugged them into in the first place. This is how empire has perpetuated itself all throughout human history. The Romans used to take the children of chieftains in areas they were trying to subordinate to the Roman Empire. They would send them back to Rome, educate them in the Roman ways, and by the time they sent them back home, they were ready to serve as imperial administrators, not fight for the freedom and sovereignty and the interests of their actual people. And so this continues today in the form of the US Fulbright Scholarship. For Southeast Asia, they have the Young Southeast Asia Leadership Initiative. They have leadership initiatives for Africa, for Central Asia, for Eastern Europe. And this is how they work their way into these countries. Many times these countries don't really have a pipeline for journalists. Local media will actually look for people who went to the collective West to study before hiring them as journalists. But when they begin their job as journalists, they are reflecting Western interests, not the interests of the country that they actually live in and are reporting in. And so this is a huge problem. Again, Russia and China have pipelines for journalism, diplomacy, leadership positions, business, the business community in their respective countries. Many other countries don't, and they need help setting them up. They need to realize that this needs to be set up. BRICS, for example, could create its own version of these very invasive US programs, except do it from the point of view of actually serving the interests of the BRICS nations, not Washington and Wall Street's interests. And so this is a huge problem that needs to be urgently fixed. This needs to become part of the agenda of the BRICS organization, ASEAN here in Southeast Asia, bilateral and bloc relations among the growing multipolar world. But I know so many people who are in positions of power and influence who underestimate just how dangerous this is. This is like a disease inside your country, slowly killing the country. And it does it so slowly that it's very hard to perceive unless you are following it very closely like I am. Now, a lot of people, prominent people in power, people with influence, understand that there will be a considerable amount of discomfort confronting the US and uprooting its interference inside their country. They understand that, and they know that there will be consequences. And they would prefer to appease the United States, buy themselves more time, maybe even convince themselves that this isn't an imminent threat to their nation. And so they will just continue putting it off. The longer you put it off, by the time it becomes obvious you need to do something about it, it's too late to do anything. This is exactly what happened to Libya in 2011. This is exactly what has now happened to Syria. This is what happened to Ukraine in 2014. This is what happened to Georgia in 2003. And so you could do it the easy way or you could do it the hard way. But if BRICS as an organization, if multipolarism as an idea emphasizes protecting individual information space and the collective information space of the multipolar world from the US, which has clearly invested heavily in weaponizing it, to the point where they're still able to overthrow entire countries despite having a military and industrial disadvantage. It should be a priority. And this is why I am trying to warn people once again to take the defense of information space seriously. It is a domain of national security here in the 21st century. Ignoring it, failing to protect it, is the same as leaving your borders open, your airspace unprotected, and surrendering your shores to foreign adversaries. I hope that despite the scale of the tragedy unfolding in Syria, people collectively learn something from this. I could also talk about how last year I warned people that the October 7th attacks by Hamas on Israel was a trap. I warned people that Hamas is not a legitimate resistance organization. It was deliberately creating a pretext for Israel to flatten Gaza and create conditions permissive across the region for a wider war that has now consumed Syria and now is poised to consume Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, possibly Yemen again. People need to focus on objective analysis. The US understands the nature of human beings very well, and it exploits it at every opportunity, especially people's emotions. The stronger the emotion, the more easily they're able to exploit it. They used people's hatred of Israel and the United States itself to help sell the Arab Spring in 2011. They initially tried to sell it as an anti-Israel, anti-American movement, and people bought it and they supported it, even though the US was behind it years in advance. And they did it again with October 7th. And they will continue doing it for as long as people allow themselves to be provoked and controlled by their emotions. So again, this was a huge tragedy. This is a big loss. It is a battle lost amid a wider war that is still taking place. People need to remember that. They need to learn from their mistakes, and they need to stay focused on the bigger picture. It is not over until it's over. And then even then, history tells us that there is always a chance for redemption in the future. I hope people found something useful in this trying time from this video. If you thought it was useful at all, please like and share. Think about subscribing to my channel. It helps the channel grow. It's free to do. Check the video description below for all the other places you can find and follow my work. I post my videos on YouTube, Rumble, Telegram, and now I'm also posting my videos on X. In the video description below are all of the links that I referenced in this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them. If people do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. To everyone who has been donating, whether it's month to month or one-time donations, that is all greatly appreciated. That is what allows me to do this work. And even if you have no spare resources at all, and you're just helping share my work with others, getting the word out there, that is also greatly appreciated. That is what makes this work effective. So thank you, and thank you for watching.
Hello, Garland Nixon here, and Sunday, no good. So we shall see what we shall see. I'm going to keep doing what I do, and we will go from there. All right. So the latest thing that happened here in the last couple of days is Syria has fallen. The neocons have made their move on Syria. And here's the way I look at it. Certainly a terrible thing, and terrible for the people of Syria, terrible for the region, terrible for the world. But I think a couple of things. Number one, people that are overly shocked or surprised or things like that. Let's start here. The U.S. empire is crumbling. It's falling apart. It's crashing. And the end is nigh for this U.S. empire. But it still has a lot of power. Still got a lot of horsepower, and in its dying throes, it's still going to be able to cause some chaos. The one thing that the neocons can still do, and you've heard a lot of people talk about it, is they can still cause some chaos. So certainly, while Russia, for one, is really has to focus on Ukraine. Ukraine is on Russia's border. I mean, and if you're Russia, and you've got to make decisions as to where you're going to focus your firepower. The fact of the matter is they've been attacked through Ukraine time and time again. Ukraine is in their immediate sphere of influence. So while Russia would like to be able to help Syria defend off the neocons, certainly Russia, the president of Russia, has 150 million Russians that he has to be responsible to first and foremost, and then of course after that he can deal with outside issues. Syria was a basis, or the Syrian bases are important for Russia as far as their dealings with Africa, etc. But keep in mind, as I always say, Russia's been around 1,000 years. Russia ain't going nowhere. These places are not going anywhere. These are actions that are happening in the throes of death for the empire and the neocons. These are acts of desperation, and they will be destabilizing, and there will be more. So before I really get into the Syria thing, let's look at what's going on in its entirety. not just Syria. Let's look at this, because certainly everybody knows this is part of a series of global acts by the neocons, by the falling empire, right? Let's start here. Certainly, it was obvious that Israel was unable to stand up to Hezbollah, unable to stand up to the fight that it had gotten itself into, and Israel's in deep and serious trouble. So what the neocons did was, okay, so we're losing a fight. We'll put that one on hold. We'll come up with a so-called deal on that one, and we'll go over there and try to take Syria down. And if we can take Syria down, then that's some other chaos we've caused. I think probably they want to take Syria down so they can interrupt the flow of arms from the axis of resistance, which will be difficult. But I believe that the axis of resistance will be able to find ways to continue the flow of arms into Syria, that they've got alternative methods. And I don't think that things are all lost there. It's, as I said, it's terrible. The Syrian people are going to suffer. The region is going to suffer. And let me tell you something about Israel. It is not a pleasant thing to have a failed state next door. So the countries that are next door to Syria that will now be dealing with a failed state next door. Now, while the U.S. empire operates in a environment of chaos, you know, the CIA will be there and they'll be doing all kinds of stuff as far as trying to maintain Syria as a chaotic situation. And then very, very close by, there's Israel, and they're going to try to make Israel somewhat stable at some point. I don't think those two things are going to go together well, because in the same way that the neocons are going to be operating in a failed state, which will be the Wild Wild West, that will also give other entities, including the axis of resistance and other groups, the ability to operate without any, real parameters, without any real boundaries. So Syria, unfortunately, will turn somewhat into a Wild Wild West scenario. And in the same way that the neocons can utilize that Wild Wild West scenario, their enemies will be able to utilize that Wild Wild West scenario against them. And I got to add this, this is part of it. If you recall, a big part of the refugee crisis that started in Europe, it started with Syria. If you remember all of these millions of Syrian refugees, when the dirty war on Syria started, this is something people aren't talking about a lot. And this is very, very important. Everybody's talking about what's happening in the Middle East. But as we always discuss on this channel, right, one of the things that goes down in the empire and its colonies, right, is they destabilize Guatemala, Venezuela, whatever, and then Guatemalans and Venezuela show up on our border. They destabilize Africa, Libya, whatever, and then Africans and Libyans show up all over Europe on their border, right? Refugees everywhere. The ruling elite, the neocons, destabilize a particular region, and the people from that region end up as refugees, showing up back in the countries that the ruling elites hailed from. Well, Syria is falling, which means refugees. There'll be refugees in Iraq. There'll be refugees in Lebanon, and be damn sure there will be refugees in Europe, and no shortage of them. And the people in Europe ain't going to be real happy about that, but that is a fact. Yeah, as someone said, sad for Syria. It's terrible for Syria. But look, Syria. Look what they've done to Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine is a friggin' disaster, and they've wiped out entire generations, and they want the next generation. They're screaming for 18-year-olds. They're saying in Ukraine, look, we still have a generation that hasn't been wiped out. Come on, get that generation on the front line so we can get this wiped out. Let's keep this thing going. When they said they were going to fight to the last man in Ukraine, they really meant it. And now they're saying the last boy in Ukraine, and women. They give a crap about Ukraine. Okay. And Syria, same way, and give a crap about these people. This is a chessboard to them. And these are chess pieces. And we, in the same way that the Ukrainians, in the same way that the Syrians are viewed as pawns, so are you. So am I. We are not viewed, people that look at that live in the US or France or Germany or whatever, and they see what's happening in Syria and they see what's happening in Ukraine, and they somehow think that the ruling elite see them different, are fooling themselves. Look what happened during COVID. They didn't stop to think, how can we act in a way that will be in the best interest of the population. They said, how can we act in the best way that'll be in a way that'll be in the best interest of the ruling elite, in the best act of the various, whether it was Pfizer or whatever company, and if there were things that were done that could compromise our health situation, so be it. They didn't care. We are pawns. We're there for the ruling elite to make money or to use as soldiers to go throw into some conflict halfway around the world. They view our bodies, they view our lives no different than they view the lives and the bodies of the Syrians and of the Ukrainians. Expendable. So Europe is in for it, because the working class of Europe, because you're going to get, as this thing spreads, I mean, basically what we've talked about is this, and we've all talked about this, right? The conflict in Gaza, in occupied Palestine, spreading. And what is it? It spread to Lebanon. They attacked Lebanon. Now they've attacked Syria. It's just the spread that many people knew of the conflict. And there will be ups and downs and goods and bads, and well, there ain't going to be no goods in a war, but there's going to be terrible things that happen. But Europe has, the U.S. and its vassals. This wasn't the U.S. This was just alone. This was Israel. This was NATO. This was another NATO move, right? NATO utilizing its mercenaries from Ukraine and its mercenaries from all over the world, Turkish mercenaries. They have Tajiks there. They have Uyghurs there. Anywhere that they can find mercenaries, they're taking them and they're throwing them into whatever part of the world that they need to cause chaos. If you think about it, I got to add this too. I think this is important. And after the Iraq War, this has been discussed. One of the things that the neocons discovered was that they couldn't have a lot of American body bags coming home. That the American people were not ready to take the casualties for their neocon ideology, that they wouldn't be able to get away with that. They found it out. They realized, crap, we can't do that. So at that point, it went full proxy. Right now, we need to have mercenaries. We need to build up our ISIS contingent. And then, of course, whether it's Ukraine or whatever, Ukraine's nothing but mercenaries. Think about it. You've got Ukrainian military personnel who have admittedly operated in Africa on behalf of the U.S. empire, operating now in Syria with drones and stuff on behalf of the U.S. empire. Why? Because the U.S., the leaders know the American people are going to flip out if a bunch of Americans come home. So what are they going to do? Use all mercenaries, Ukrainian mercenaries now. And if you had any question about what the Ukraine conflict was about, whether it was about Ukraine, the fact that they're using Ukrainian mercenaries in the Middle East and in Africa should clear that up for you. It's not about Ukraine. This is about their world war of domination. So now what we've got is another destabilized state, a large destabilized state in the Middle East. And there's no way to tell how that's going to turn out, but we'll continue to watch that. And I might add, a lot of the things that we're looking at will continue, because they see Trump as a wild card. We can say Trump will do this, Trump won't do this, Trump will probably do this, Trump probably won't do this. But the truth of it is we don't know. Here's the truth. We don't know. I mean, all this, what do you call it? Guessing, where people pretend as though, the term I hate, false certainty. Let me tell you something, Garland. Trump's a neocon and he's going to double down on all these wars. He might. Let me tell you something. Trump is a peacenik and he's going to come in and try to stop all these wars. He might. No, he's going to be somewhere in between. He's going to do he might. We don't know. And that's the problem the neocons have. They don't know either. We don't know. We hope, we cross our fingers. A lot of us project onto Trump. We want him to be a peacenik, so we project peace onto him. Well, Trump's going to get in and he wants to end these wars and do this and that. So we project that onto him. Others of us have lost all trust in the system, so we project that loss of trust onto Trump. I don't care what Trump says. He just wants to continue these wars. He's lying to us, right? Well, we don't know. And what I'm not going to say is, this is what the mainstream media, this is the mainstream would have you say. The one extreme is he's going to be a neocon. The other extreme is he's going to be a peacenik. The truth is somewhere in between. Well, that's called, in philosophy, that's called the myth of the middle, meaning that all you have to do is find two extremes and the answer is most likely in the middle. Well, that's not true. That's not true. That is a myth. That is, again, what is that? That's a guess. Well, I guess that if I guess both extremes on Trump, he'll be right in the middle. No, that the odds don't even say that. That's just a guess, and it's a myth, and it's referred to as the myth of the middle. We don't know what the hell Trump will do. The only thing we can do is we can know what Trump is doing, and we can look at based on what he's doing and try to figure out from what he's doing what direction that leads. We can listen to his rhetoric, and we can compare his rhetoric with his actions, and then we can try to come up with something from that. But the idea that he's going to be a total neocon, or he's going to be the second coming of Gandhi, or the truth is right dead in the center, that myth of the middle, all of that is false. This is going to be a fluid thing, and we're going to have to watch it, and we're going to have to listen. And that's the problem the neocons have. They don't want to guess, because they have a very brittle ideology, and they have a very brittle plan, which isn't even working, but whatever. And so anything that disrupts their plan is a problematic. You got to, you remember the term is Manichaean, right? George W. Bush. I first started hearing that term Manichaean being used a lot with George Bush, where he says, you're either with us or you're against us. What is that? Black and white thinking, dichotomy, either A or B. There's no grays. It's black or white. You're with me, you're against me. You're good or bad. You're smart or stupid. There's no possibilities that in some instances we can agree and work on things together. In other instances, we can disagree and we'll go our separate ways on that issue. If you disagree with me on one issue, then you disagree with me on every issue, right? Black and white thinking. Okay, that's where the neocons are, because they're fascist, they're totalitarian, and those kinds of thoughts actually are the foundation of totalitarian, authoritarian thinking. But we, in our little chat room here, try to avoid that, don't we? Somebody else said binary bigots or non-binary bigots. I don't know. But at any rate, so let's continue. So Syria fell. What we will hear from some people is that's it. The empire has won. Russia has lost. Iran, they're going to fall next. Russia's going to fall next. China, everybody's going to fall because Syria fell. It's all over. The neocons have won. No, the neocons haven't won. They have accomplished a particular task, and I don't think they have good plans after that. And as I said, the people that they have chosen as mercenaries aren't really the most reliable people in the world. So they've got, as the saying I always say, a pet werewolf, right? They'll make good pets because they don't listen. Mad dogs doesn't make good pets. A guard dog makes a good pet, because a guard dog, when you tell a guard dog to bite, he'll bite someone else and protect you. When you tell a mad dog to bite, he's going to bite the nearest leg that he can get his teeth in, sink his teeth into it. And if your leg's the closest one, he's biting you. He's not controllable. And the forces that they've used in Syria are not controllable. In the same way that the forces that they have in Ukraine are not controllable. And they're going to find that out. They're the same people. The forces they got in Israel, they're mad fascists, crazies. The forces they've got in Syria are ISIS type crazy fascist madmen, and they got goose stepping Sieg Heil Nazis in Ukraine, and they're not controllable. And there's a reason that for this continuity, because they have to use these types of factions in order to accomplish their tasks. And if you want to do something, if you want to take some idiot and you want to sacrifice that idiot, right? If you want that idiot to do something really stupid, to risk their life, maybe be killed, if you want that idiot to act in a way that's not in their best interest, you got to have really stupid people. You got to have really stupid people. And when you got ideologues, they're really stupid, not by intellectual definition, but by ideological definition. You can be the smartest person in the world. If you're in a cult, yeah, you're an idiot. I don't care what your intellect is. See the neocons, right? Some of them are smart people, but they're idiots because of their cult, autocratic, authoritarian, fascist-minded people. They're not smart. In the same way that, what's the guy's name who flew the Spirit of St. Louis across the Atlantic, the famous pilot, German guy. Bottom line is, he went to just before World War II. He was a guest of the Nazis, and he went there and he went all over Germany. Yeah, Lindenberg. He went all over Germany and he looked at all of the things they were doing and the things they were building and their technology. And he came back and he said, you know, they're really impressive, these Nazis. They're really smart and they're doing all this kind of stuff. I mean, they're really intellectual. They're really able to come up with great feats of engineering, etc. And I was impressed by that. That's what Lindenberg said. How he talked about how impressed he was, but he said the thing that he couldn't get over was how stupid they are. Right. So he was impressed by their intellectual feats, but he was unimpressed by their intellectual view of the world. Why? Because they're fascists, and fascism dulls your senses, and it forces you to live in a world of false certainty. Right? I know this is true, and once you get into a world of false certainty, you will not even entertain any information or any data that is in opposition to what you believe. Right? And not only that, you have to condemn people who present data that are in opposition to what you believe. So if you say, I believe this, and someone says, I don't believe it. Now, me, when somebody says, I don't believe it, I'm like, excellent. Now we're talking. Now I want to hear your the data and information that you have. Maybe I'll learn something. Maybe I'll change my mind. Even if it doesn't change my mind, perhaps I will learn where you're coming from and I understand why you're there. And I can keep that. Maybe later on I'll pick something up. Maybe later on I'll make some sense. But I welcome information and data that differs from what I already have, what I believe. I need new data, right? I had somebody when a couple of shows ago, and I was talking about different things, and I said, I have friends or I have people in the chat who believe in chemtrails, and logically speaking, I could poke some holes in that. I'm not there, right? And I had someone actually contact me. Well, if you don't believe in chemtrails, then I can't follow your channel anymore. And my answer, I said, you probably should leave. This is not the channel for you. Not because I do or not believe that I don't believe in chemtrails, no, but because this ain't the channel for you. If you are not able to entertain information that runs contrary to what you already believe, this ain't the place for you. You need to go over with the neocons where you are certain of what you believe. And if somebody presents something that's in opposition, well, how dare you? Don't you know I have the truth? How dare you come up with something different and say you disagree? Whereas I'd be like, we disagree on this, but we sure as hell agree on that. Excellent. Let's talk about the things we agree on. And if you got something that you think would convince me, pitch it forward. I would have had more respect for the person if they'd have said, look, Garland, I know you don't believe that. I just wanted to give you some information here. Here's some links. Here's some information. Here's a video. Here's this and that. Look over those. That might change your mind, might not. That I would have respected. But we disagree when it comes to this. Well, I can't watch your channel anymore. Well, I don't want you here. That ain't where we are. That ain't where I am. And I can't really, I don't feel comfortable dealing with people that are those kind of black and white thinking. That just because that's not your friend. That's not a person who is getting anywhere, who is going to work with you, who is going to improve things, who is going to work on improving the world, because they're just trying to prove that they're right all the time. And I don't believe in that. But my point being this, because that's the way the neocons think, that's who they align with, whether it's ISIS, whether it's Nazis in Ukraine or in Israel, they're going to align with fascist-minded people. I don't do well with those kinds of people, but that's what they're doing. That's what they do, and that blows up in your face at some point eventually. Let's continue. I did want to mention this about Europe. If you're in Europe, you're so screwed, because now you're going to see, as this war continues to spread, probably into Iraq next, whatever, as it continues to spread throughout the Middle East. It's going to do two things. Number one, it's going to flood Europe with refugees, but it's getting cold. And the Ukraine thing, have you seen how many towns are falling? These towns are falling left and right. And you're going to have Trump people now are starting to talk with Zelensky, and there's discussions of ending it and discussions of how you can start negotiating, etc. And at some point, a lot of people who are inclined towards goose stepping are going to say, I'm getting the hell out of here while I still can. Not withstanding what will or won't happen or whether they will or won't get a deal, they're going to be getting the hell out of there. And as things come unraveled, as Ukraine gets closer and closer to Trump, and Trump comes in, when he comes in, Ukraine's going to become more and more unraveled. Militarily, it's becoming more and more unraveled, and you're going to see, and colder, and you're going to see millions of refugees flooding out of Ukraine into Europe. Europe's so screwed. You're going to see refugees flooding out of the Middle East into Europe. You're going to see refugees flooding out of Ukraine into Europe. And the ruling elite's going to be like, we've got these refugees, these great Ukrainian refugees. You know, they'll be goose stepping, Sig Heilin, doing all kinds of unthinkable things with their questionable ideology. And they're going to be coming from the East, from the West, from the Mediterranean. Guess what's going to happen? Europe will be, and we, you know, on this channel, we talked about it before, about how Europe gets screwed. The European people get screwed. It will be loaded with refugees, loaded with them. And guess what? When the Europeans say, hey, what's it? There's all these people coming from the Middle East. And might I add, when they start coming from the Middle East, the Africans will be like, oh boy, the train's open again. And of course, it when and if the destabilization spreads, bottom line is Africans and Middle Easterners, not because they want to leave, they want to stay there, but because, as we always talk about, because the ruling elite in Europe and the US have destabilized their country, they're going to get the hell out of there, and they're going to show up in Italy, and they're going to show up in Germany, and they're going to show up in it. And when the European people say, hey, what are all these freaking people showing up, and there's people everywhere, and I don't know what the hell, some of them are ISIS, and what's going on here? The ruling elite will look at him and say, you racist, sexist pigs, you racist scum. How dare you say something about all of the Africans and Middle Easterners that are showing up? If you happen to say, our country can't hold but so many people, and we just got another million people from these wars that you started, they'll say, no, that's not your issue. You're all a bunch of racists, you're bigots, and blah, 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 blah. And they'll just keep flooding it. And then, of course, the Ukrainians, well, they're white and blonde-haired, blue eyes. They look like you. So they'll be like, well, we got to take them in. They're Christians, just like we are. Yeah, they go step a little bit, maybe. You know, are they kind of heavily armed? Maybe a little bit of crime coming in, and prostitution, child pedophilia, child trafficking. Sure, fair enough. But they're Christians and they look like us, so we got to take them. And so guess what happens? You're flooded with criminal activity from Ukraine. You're flooded with desperate and hungry families, entire families coming from Syria and where the hell ever. And guess what happens? You ain't figured it out. You get called a racist because you get called a racist and a white supremacist because you ain't too thrilled with that. That's sorry, Europe. Bad news. That's just the way it is. Let's continue. I mean, let's face it. It doesn't take, I don't have to be a genius to figure that. Anybody, people in the chat, right now in the chat, can you listen to me and say, well, that Garland, well, he missed it on this one. Oh, I mean, Garland usually, there's some credibility in what he's saying, but this time he's totally out in left field. Why would there be millions of Ukrainian refugees in the middle of the winter when their country is collapsing, when their children are being caught like animals in a trap so they can be thrown at the 17, 18 years old, thrown to the front lines, when in fact their electrical grid is in collapse and it's like 10 degrees outside? Why would they leave? No, you know I'm right. They're getting the hell out. And Europe is where they're going to show up. And last time I checked, Volkswagen's out of here, Audi's done, Porsche's toast, Mercedes is closing down. Did I mention that these idiots are pissing off the Chinese people? Did you know this? China was going to build this like multi-billion-dollar EV factory. And when the European leaders said, "You stinking Chinese people, you will do what the United States says, our masters, and if you don't, you can't sell EVs." And China was like, "Okay, never mind on that multi-billion-dollar EV factory." So those were jobs for you. Those were jobs for the working class people in Europe, and Annalena Baerbock and the rest of these goose-stepping mutts doing the bidding of the neocons here in Foggy Bottom have screwed you to know not what. Europe's going to go bad. Europe's going to go real bad. People there are going to get pissed. Anyway, let me continue. So what's going on? Let me say this. We got a 2-month period going up to now. It's getting shorter and shorter, right? Before you know it, what the hell? I don't have any idea. Today could be the 5th. Today could be today is the 8th, right? Okay, so we got a little over a month. 5-6 weeks until Trump comes in. And notwithstanding whatever you think of Trump, the neocons are getting their last gasp. They don't know what's going to happen, but I think they're in fear. And so what they think they're trying to do a couple of things. Their bucket list, their wish list. What do we need to do before Trump comes in? Well, we got countries we need to overthrow. Give me a list of them. We got to overthrow them now. We got wars we need to start. Quick, get on top of that. We need all the wars we need to start. We only got a month, 6 weeks. That's 1 war a week, for God's sake, right? That's what this is about. They moved on Ukraine, on Syria, because they thought, well, Trump may be in and he may try to shut this thing down. And we got countries we need to overthrow. I would suspect they're going to try to draw Iran in. I would suspect, let me add this. They're going to do some more stupid things in Ukraine, but the problem they got is the Russians are kind of onto them, right? The Russians are really onto them. I think they thought they could bait Russia into like smacking Cyprus or someplace in Europe with some tactical nukes. That's what look. Bad news, Europeans. You guys are expendable. And the lunatics over here looked at Europe, and of course, all of Europe is expendable. So they said, here's what we do. We fire these attacks at Russia. Russia gets pissed. Russia fires some tactical nukes. They hit Europe here and there. And voila, we can then say to Europe, you've been attacked by Russia. Maybe you can fire some tactical nukes back and you guys can have a nuclear exchange and wipe the hell out of each other. That's a thought. Yeah, that would be a great thing, right? The hundreds of millions of Europeans dead. We got them out of the way. Europe is destroyed. Russia's destroyed. And we're still standing. Wouldn't that be just great if you're a neocon? But unfortunately for them, the Russians are smart enough. Yeah, we can figure it out. The Russians are smart enough to figure it out. So the Russians now, I think they're starting to realize it's not going to be as easy to drag the Russians into retaliating as they thought. As I've said, at the very beginning, people said of this thing after Trump died, a lot of people were saying, that's it, we're done. They're going to fire the attackums. What's Russia going to do? Is it going to blow up the bases? No, it's going to hit Romania. It's going to hit whatever, right? It's going to hit Europe. No, it'll be Cyprus, blah, blah, blah. And my thought was, look, the Russians ain't stupid. I went on RT and I just said, the Russians ain't stupid. They interviewed me. I said, Russia's been around 1,000 years. You're not going to be around 1,000 years being stupid. So they understand that the attackums was a trap, that was the cheese in the trap. They understood that if you're dealing with the neocons and you say to them, well, doggone it, if you step on my foot, I will attack. They're going to stomp on your foot. Oh, really? That's all we need you to do? And you'll attack Europe? Oh, because Europe is an expendable asset, right? It is a card to be played, just like Syria was. And you remember what Victoria Nuland's famous saying about the EU, F the EU? They don't like you. They really don't. And if they could get you smashed to pieces, nuked, burned up, fried, loaded with refugees, ideally what they like is load all the refugees in Europe and then nuke the hell out of Europe and kill most of the Europeans and the refugees too. And then everything, all is well as far as the neocons are concerned, right? But as I said, the Russians aren't stupid, and the Russians are going to bide their time. I think, did the Russians want to lose Syria? Absolutely not. But they had choices to make, where they're going to put their firepower, and they knew they had to take Ukraine. They knew that as bad as it is as losing Syria, right? That's bad. That's unpleasant. That's horrible for the Syrian people, horrible for the region, horrible for the Palestinians, all that kind of stuff, right? But they understood that Ukraine is ground zero for this war, this total war. They understood that for the world, for Syria, Okay, fair enough. For the Middle East, fair enough. You really don't want that to fall. But for the world, the Ukraine is ground zero for World War III, which is what the neocons have going on, because they got the win in Ukraine. If they lose in Ukraine, they've been defeated, period. If they, everybody's watching that. And what the Russians know is they're winning and they're going to win. And any way this thing ends is a win for Russia at this point. Okay. So they knew, look, if we got to choose where we're going to put our firepower and our assets, it's got to be Ukraine, because we got to win that one. That's on their border. That's a knife at the, when you got a knife on your throat right here, you're evolving in self-defense, and you got to think, one guy's got a knife, there's a knife at your throat here, and there's, you know, a guy's got a baseball bat over there, whatever, right? You got to deal with this knife first. You got to get control of this knife first. You got to get this knife away from your throat, and then you can deal with the baseball bat and all that, right? This is right here. Ukraine is a knife at the throat of Russia. So Russia had to make a decision, in my opinion. And the decision was our firepower will go in Ukraine, because once they win that, the rest gets easier. Think about this. They know what they're up against. And Russia has dramatically increased its firepower, its military power, everything from its military technology to the number of soldiers they have, to the number of planes and tanks and everything else they have. So they're dramatically stronger than they were, and they're militarily dominant at this point for as far as the European theater, okay? And the Eurasian theater. Russia's become militarily dominant. So once Russia gets the knife away from their throat, they can now fight the guy over there with a baseball bat. They got to worry about that. If that knife at your throat, you got two guys. One of them's got a bat. Don't worry about the bat. Would you like to deal with the bat? Yeah. Got to get this knife away from your throat. Ukraine's a knife at their throat. You got to get control of that knife. You got to control that knife. And let me tell you something. There are people that'll be like, okay, you know, to defend against the knife, what do you do? Look, it's not the person that's hurting you now. It's not the person that's the threat to you now, to some extent. It's the knife. You got to get control of the weapon. If it's a gun and they got a gun in your head, you got to get control of that gun, you know, with the hand, get it pointed up, get it pointed away from you, things like that, right? You got to think it's the gun. You got to get the gun out of their hand, get the gun away from them. If you can knock it on the ground and everybody's reaching for the gun, kick the gun away. The gun is your problem. Now you can deal with this person. You can hand to hand, you can fight them, but the weapon there has to be dealt with. And ideally, what do you want to do? I want to get that knife out of your hand, and I want to have the weapon against you. I want to get the gun out of your hand, or grab the gun, turn it around to the person here, right? There are a lot of ways you can get control of the gun and spin it around to the person, and then you can shoot it. You can get control of the knife, you can spin it around and push it towards them, and they get cut themselves with their own knives. There's a lot of ways, but that knife is at your throat. You got to deal with that first, right? Ukraine's a knife at Russia's throat. So anyone who says, oh my gosh, all is over, all for Russia, they've lost Syria, they've got 2 bases in Syria, those bases are critical, but they ain't as critical as Crimea. They ain't as critical as Donbass and people sitting on the Dnieper River, right? If the U.S. empire puts nukes in Syria, will they be happy? No. But if they put nukes in Ukraine, they got real problems. So that's what Russia's doing. Russia's going to deal with Ukraine first and foremost, and then they will decide which has to be dealt with next. I really believe that. Now, let me add this. Meanwhile, also on Russia's border, you got to take this into account, Georgia. I believe that the Georgian Dream is doing a good job of holding off the attempt at another Maidan. Again, this is chaos, the chaos theory. This is ideally what the neocons want to do in Georgia, because they know Trump's coming in, right? And they know Trump just doesn't have a taste. Here's the truth. It's obvious he doesn't have a taste for this Ukraine stuff. It's obvious that you can say whatever you want about Trump. This is obvious. He views the Ukraine war as Biden's war, not his. And he views Biden and those people as his enemies, which he's correct, because they have tried to destroy him over and over and probably tried to kill him. Okay? So the bottom line is Trump does not want any part of picking up the mantle from these people. He wants out. Whether he can or not, I don't know. But it is obvious that Trump, at this point, Trump wants out as soon as possible. You can have a discussion of he wants out so he can do this, that, or whatever, but he wants out. Okay. Somebody said Al Qaeda has its own internationally recognized state. No, it doesn't. If you think that's Al Qaeda, no, the United States has this. The neocons have this. Al Qaeda are mercenaries. They are a means to an end. Al Qaeda ain't ruling nothing. They ain't in charge of nothing. They are a patsy. They are a proxy. They're not in charge. Anyway, so what I'm saying is this. The knowing that good, bad, or indifferent, Trump wants to get out of the Ukraine stuff. I think one of the critical things that the neocons are looking at is we gotta surrounding Russia with their assets, and that the neocons here are saying, look, whatever happens here, European neocons, we need to get Georgia, and the neocons in Europe can continue to use Georgia at Russia's throat. And they just had a bad situation also in Romania because this guy won the election. He won the what do you call it? The preliminary elections, the first round, and it was obvious he was going to win the second round. And he's not a pro-NATO guy at all. He is Viktor Orban. He is Robert Fico, and he was like, "Look, we're Romania, a little freaking country. Sorry, we don't want to fight Russia. We don't want to fight anybody. We want out." And obviously he was representing the people because the people said yes. And what happened? He was about to win, and the Romanian courts came together and said, "Oh, you got to love this." Well, because there were people putting videos on TikTok that we're going to deem that Russian interference, and therefore we're going to annul the election. Now, what do you want to bet? They're going to have another election, and either he's going to be filled full of bullet holes, he'll be thrown out of the country, or he'll be ruled a Russian asset and he will not be allowed to run. What they're doing is, I mean, this is the only choice they got now, whether it's France, where the opposition to Macron won, and Macron said, "Who cares? I'm just going to stick some globalist neocon in power anyway," where the Germans are doing everything they can to take out any of the parties that are in opposition. You know, whether it's the UK, where they've created one party that, you know, the Tories and Labour, which is one party, and with the exact same policies. They've done this all over the place. Heads I win, tails you lose. And now in Romania, they screwed around and pissed the people off to the point where the people want something else, and they're like, "We're not going to let you have it." That independent sovereignty democracy, that is not allowed. That is a phrase that they use as a means to an end, but in reality, that is not a belief that the neocons in any way, shape, or form want to practice. Right? If the people are viewed as expendable, yeah, sure as hell don't want any input from the people, because the time may come where you need to sacrifice all of them. So what the hell? Why would you? They may say no. You can't put them in a position to say yes or no. No, you can't do that. They're going to be sacrificed. So Romania is now going to be a very, very unstable country. And if you think about this, here's what they do in Romania. You take out the guy who was anti-NATO, who was going to win. And then when the protests start and you use that to say, "Oh, well, there's protests, it's unstable," why Russia is pushing those protests. And worst case scenario, you've destabilized the country. And you can keep the people in power and say, "Well, we can't have an election right now. The country's too unstable. The people are in the street. They're screaming and yelling. And that's not the people. It's not organic. It's all Russia." So there's a struggle on the border in Romania, in Georgia, on the border of Russia, where the neocons are struggling for power, are trying to hold back the flood in Europe of people who are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that ain't going to slow up. It's going to increase in intensity as the economic pain increases in intensity. Now, let me add this back to the whole Syria, Ukraine, Romania, all that stuff. In the 6 weeks that we have left before Trump starts, and please don't start, but Trump's going to this, or he's good, or he's bad. We don't know what the hell Trump's going to do. He's going to do what he's going to do. And once he starts doing it, then we can talk about it then. Right. We do know that Trump has had some meetings with, I think, Zelensky and maybe Macron. I might have talked to Putin. I'm not sure. But Trump has started a discussion about ending Ukraine. I don't know what happens there, but the discussion has started. Personally, here's the only thing I'll say about that. That's a good thing. The Biden administration, Joe Biden had a rule since the beginning of the special military operation, and the rule was nobody was allowed to talk to the Russians, except a few Pentagon channels that they had for safety. Other than that, you're not allowed to talk to the Russians, which means it's obvious, because if you talk to the Russians, somebody will hear what they have to say, and it could get out in the media, and people say, hey, you told me the Russians wanted war, and it's obvious the Russians want to find some kind of a diplomatic conclusion to this thing. So Trump, whatever happens, talking to the Russians will bear some kind of fruit. If nothing else, we will get to hear what's going on, and we have a right. And some things will leak out. Certainly, you know what's going to happen. The mainstream media. Well, I don't know. Here's the thing: the mainstream media will go after Trump for talking to the Russians, but it's going to be difficult for them to do it like they have before, because let's face it, I mean, if we're honest about it, Trump crushed the Democrats. He crushed the mainstream Republicans. He crushed the media. I mean, if we're honest, I mean, come on. I don't care what you think of Trump. He crushed all of them. And I say Trump crushed them. That's not really what I mean. If there's another way to put it, I could put it that Trump crushed him, or I could put it that a populist movement, a movement that's tired economically and angry economically, a movement that sees their money being wasted for wars and terrible things, and sees their government doing things that they're unhappy with. And this movement said, we want something different. And they projected that difference onto Trump. We will see how different he is. But bottom line is this: a movement of people all over who are tired of the status quo chose somebody different, and they may just get the status quo in some ways. I suspect there are a lot of ways, if we go by what Trump did before, where he will be the status quo, and there's a few ways he'll be different. And probably because they pounded on him for so long and tried to kill his ass, that's going to have an effect. Okay, if somebody's firing rounds at you, I think that has effect on how you view the world. Bottom line, that's one of those things that causes great change, as we say in Zen, sudden enlightenment brought about by a bullet or two, right? So I think Trump has had some sudden enlightenment. How that will affect him, we shall see. I do believe this: a big way that it'll affect Trump is internally, how he tries to deal with the intelligence and so-called law enforcement, DOJ people, etc. I think he wants some revenge there, and I think he wants to clean that mess up, and we shall see whether he cleans it up or they put a bullet in him and take him out. What's going to happen, I don't know. But he has a inclination to do that. I do believe this, that a lot of Trump's inclination now is going to be internally, that he wants to do a lot of stuff in America, like get back to people that took him out. If nothing else, Trump is very vindictive, and I think that some of that vindictiveness will show up. Now, someone put it good in the chat. They put, Russia should act, not talk. Here's the thing: those two things are not mutually exclusive, right? I think Russia understands this. Good comment. Thank you for inspiring me with that. Russia will continue what they're doing in Ukraine because it benefits the talk, right? If I want to convince you of something, if I can take actions that will put pressure on you, they will affect our negotiations. And I think the Russians realize something, particularly now. I think that the Russians know January 20th, Trump comes in and Trump wants to talk. He wants to talk. We can talk about what he can or can't do. He wants to talk, and he wants a deal. And Trump's ego, I will guarantee you this. You know, Trump, huge ego. Trump wants to say, nobody thought Trump could do it, but I did it. I came in. I told you. They said he'll never get a deal. I'll get a deal. I'm Trump. Trump wants to come in and be Superman. Trump wants to come in and have a cape flying, you know. And look, what's obvious? You're always seeing these memes and these AI generated pictures of Super Trump, and he's standing there like that. And here I come to save the day, you know. And there's a cape flying, and he's got a Superman suit on or something. Trump loves that stuff, and he wants to leave it out. And Trump wants a deal quick so that he can fold his arms and say these people couldn't do nothing. Oh, they're nobody. I'm the man. And he also knows that if he gets that there will be a roar of approval, that all of the Trump people go, yeah, we told you Trump's the man. And he'll, yeah, I'm Trump. You know what I mean? So the foreign policy part of it is probably overwhelmed by the narcissistic Trumpian part of it that says, I want to be the man. And let's be honest again about something. You can call Trump every narcissist in the world. All human beings have a certain part of their character that is narcissistic. It's healthy. You got to think about yourself sometime. What's unhealthy is a lot of people who never look out for themselves, right? They don't have any boundaries. They don't know how to take care of themselves. They don't know how to look out for themselves. And that's not healthy either. I think Trump's a bit on the other side, shall we say, but that can be used for good too, in that if Trump feels that he'll look real good if he gets a deal and gets a deal quick, then he'll be trying to do it. Now, it could go bad if Trump says, well, therefore, the Russians aren't going along with it, so I'll push them by sending more weapons or something like that. I think that, be honest, may be wrong. I think part of that may be Trump, that art of the deal stuff where Trump says you gotta, sound tough and then, go hard. If I want to buy a car for $1,000, I got to offer $1 and you come back and say, no, I'll take 800. Then I say, all right, I'll get up to 600. I got to start with an extreme. That's Trump. If you understand Trump's negotiation, it's start with an extreme. Always start with an extreme to shock your opponent and to make your opponent say, oh my God, I'm never going to get a deal with this guy. He's nuts. He does not even understand the character of the negotiations we're going to have to do. And oh my God, did you hear this offer this guy made? It's a joke. That's how Trump starts, with an extreme offer. And then when you say, I'm sorry, we're not getting a deal, I got to have at least this, this or that. What he's banking on is when you hear his extreme offer, if you're asking for $1,000, you'll say, this is an idiot, but I better drop down to 800 because I got to at least go down some. So Trump's like, look, if you're asking 1,000 and offer 950, I already know you're going to drop to 925. If you're asking 1,000 and I offer $1, you're going to say, come on, man, I'm not going to get a deal with this guy. He's an idiot. I can drop to 800. How about that? And then Trump says, well, how about 7? And now he sounds reasonable, but he sounds reasonable, but he's gotten you lower faster than you would have normally dropped down. And I think that's part of Trump's stuff. Trust me when I tell you this, it ain't going to be easy negotiating with the Russians simply because they got so much at stake. Ukraine's big to them. And they've got some things that they can't possibly give up on. They cannot possibly accept, right? And Ukraine has got to be out of NATO, not for 5 years, not for 20 years, not for 80 years, not for 99 years. It's got to be agreed that Ukraine is not never, ever going into NATO, that they're not hosting troops, they're not hosting bases. This Ukraine thing has to be dealt with once and for all. And I think what Russia's going to do is pummel the hell out of Ukraine from now until January 20th. And in January 20th, Ukraine's going to be in a world of hurt. They're in a world of hurt now, but they're going to be in a world of hurt. And I think it's going to be looking bad for Ukraine. Internally, there'll be a lot of pressure in Ukraine for a deal. That's going to continue to pick up. As I said, winter's going to be really, really cold. And I think there'll be refugees leaving, and Ukraine's going to be in no position to have a strong negotiation. Plus, I think Zelensky knows that Trump and his people see him as a clown. My understanding was Trump met him recently and he had on the old green, fatigues, and that the people in the Trump camp said he was dressed disrespectfully and inappropriately, right? Which I agree. I agree. I've seen this guy, and I'm like, you're going to meet the president, you're going to meet the prime minister and the foreign minister, you're going to meet the leader of this and that, and you're walking around looking like a freaking janitor. You're an embarrassment. You are disrespecting yourself, you're disrespecting your country, and you're disrespecting the people, the offices of the people. I got no use for these clowns holding these offices, but you're disrespecting the office. And apparently Trump's people said that. And at any rate, but in saying that, what did they do? They said, we got no respect for this guy. He's just a clown and a puppet to us. Please. So they don't respect him. It's obvious the Trump people have no respect for him. They see him for what he is. Let's not forget, Trump is kind of a pushy, bully, kind of old school, kind of macho-y kind of guy, right? Braggadocious is the word they used to say on the street, right? People like that don't respect softies. People that don't respect like that don't respect puppets. They don't respect guys who don't have any spine or background. They don't respect people like that. And Zelensky ain't the kind of guy that Trump and his people are going to have any respect for at all. They ain't going to like him. They're not going to respect him. So it's going to be difficult for Zelensky to get what he wants. So we shall see. And I think Russia's going to, now Trump saying we need a ceasefire, we need a ceasefire, we need a ceasefire. The ceasefire is about this. Look, if I'm laying on the ground and you got me pinned with your knees and you're beating me in the face, pummeling me mercilessly, chain punches, as they say. Bottom line is this. I need a ceasefire. You don't. And if you say, I'm going to keep punching you, but we have a disagreement. That's why I'm punching you, over a disagreement. If we settle the disagreement, I'll stop punching you for good. But you're not getting a ceasefire because I'm winning. I don't need a ceasefire. You do. So right now, Ukraine needs a ceasefire. And they're probably going to talk to Trump saying, can you get a ceasefire? Now, I'll put it like this. Coming into this, could or would the Russians do a ceasefire? I doubt it. I doubt it. But it's possible. But the thing about the Russians is, and they've said it, we don't need it. We will accomplish what we need through the special military operation, and we ain't stopping, and we'll take a deal. We prefer it. We got things to do. But this is an existential threat. As I said, they got a knife to their throat. They got to get a knife off their throat. They got to protect Crimea. They've also said they have to protect the rights of the Russian speakers, the Russian ethnic citizens in Ukraine. So we will see. That's hard to tell. For hell, we don't even know if Trump's going to live till January 20th, the way things are going, right? Certainly, there are elements that would want to do him dirty. Let's hope he does. We don't want to see violence towards anyone. But I'm just saying, at this point, it's a long ways from now to January 20th. Let me add this. I don't think the neocons are finished because they are, fairly desperate and they know they ain't got much time. And I'm guaranteeing you, I got to add this to it. You got to think about this. They haven't made a move in Asia yet. They tried, I believe. What happened in Asia? The South Korean president said that he was instituting martial law and that the parliament, all other parts of government, sorry about guys, you got no power, you're shut down. I am now the boss. So basically what he said was he basically named himself as dictator. Now, based on what's happening in Poland, based on what's happening in Romania, based on what's happening in Georgia, it seems obvious to me that Blinken and Sullivan were behind that. It seems obvious to me that Blinken and Sullivan went to this guy and said, look, we got some problems that we need to resolve before Trump gets in, and we need somebody to fire some rounds over across the DMZ into North Korea. Donald, think about this. They're scared as hell about North Korea. They're scared that because Trump said, I'm going to go make a deal in North Korea. I'm going to go talk to Kim Jong-un. Again, they don't want to talk. What they want to say is that person is evil. We can't talk to evil. But Trump says, let's talk to him, right? At least when you talk, some things good potentially can happen. Not that they will or won't, but if you talking, you listen to any. I was listening to. I was on some panels yesterday. You probably saw one of the panels was I was in D.C. at the National Press Club, and one of the panels members, one of the really great panels was Colonel Larry Wilkerson, and he talked about the importance of talking. That look, man. we can get something done if we can talk. We can make a move. We can get the peace. We can get all over the place. Once you start talking, you have an avenue to escape the violence. So my point is this. The fact, I'm not a pro or a negative Trump person. The fact that he will talk means something potentially may possibly be accomplished. That's all I'm saying. Now let's continue. You got to think about South Korea. So what happened, the Korean Peninsula, because the neocons now, they're like, okay, all right, on Russia's border, we got Romania, we got Georgia, we got all hell breaking loose. Let's keep the pressure there. Let's continue this chaos, madness on Russia's border, and they're going to try to maybe Armenia, Azerbaijan, which is again friends with Turkey, so it wouldn't shock me if Armenia, something bad happens there, right? But they got their spot going on there. Syria, okay, we've taken Syria, we got the jihadis in here now, and now we can go on and do our dirt while the jihadis just go about their way with cutting heads off or whatever the hell they do. We can continue to steal the oil. Nobody's going to complain about it. The jihadis sure ain't. We'll just give them some more guns and weapons to cut heads off with. And the hell with the Syrian people, they're getting out of there. They're heading for Europe. So the Europeans will be sitting there wondering why all of their money's going to these new millions of refugees, and they'll be pissed, and it'll probably open the door for more refugees. And some of them will be members of Al Qaeda and ISIS saying, hey, we took Syria. Why not the UK and France? So you ain't going to work out well for UK and France. But at any rate, and the US may be behind it because you know what? Because they love, think about this. In the event that Macron kind of starts to go down, let's just say for the sake of argument that the people of France were to get a government that was a little more attuned to their needs. Let's say for the purpose of argument that Germany was to get a government change that was a little, not saying that they will, but just for the sake of argument, a government that was a little more attuned to their needs. Do you think the government, the US government wouldn't do the same damn thing that they're doing in Georgia right now? Or Romania? Do you think if some guy or girl or group or party won in Italy, Germany, France, in the first round, it was heading for the second round, you think the courts wouldn't come along and annul it and say there was TikTok videos and the Russians were involved, or that they wouldn't use violence against them? Hell, they shot Robert Fico a bunch of times. You think they wouldn't use the same? You are naive if you think that they wouldn't have riots in the streets of Paris, and might I add, or the UK, or wherever the hell people in the Europe were pushing back against. This is perfect. You get a couple million Ukrainian and Syrian and Middle Eastern refugees from wars that you started, but mixed in there, you got your Nazis and mercenaries that you paid for, and mixed in there, you got your ISIS people that you paid for. You get them involved in the mix. Now they're in France too, or Germany, or wherever, right? The Germans, the French vote for somebody that says, hey, I'm sick and tired of this. I want out of NATO. I want out of this. Right now, you activate those ISIS cells, you activate those Nazi cells, and you say, hey, guys, we need you in the streets of Paris, burning shit, tearing stuff up, killing people, blowing things up, terrorism, everything. You want to destabilize France, don't you? You want to turn France into Syria or Libya or whatever the case may be, so that you can go in there and operate. So rest assured that in the event that the French or the Germans or any other European country is able, through the voting process, through using democratic means, is able to install a government that will act on behalf of the people, that the neocons in Washington will then activate the assets that they have in your country, many of which will come in through, as I said, Ukrainian or Middle Easterner. They will look. A lot of those people are just going to be desperate refugees. The overwhelming majority of them are going to be desperate, struggling, starving, suffering refugees, right? Created by the ruling elite, destabilizing their country. But within that group, there will also be, they use the term sleeper cells, assets, U.S. MI6 assets that will be able to be utilized once you have an election or something that they don't like, to go to the streets to enact violent methods or of burning or looting or killing or whatever, just go to the streets, rioting, etc., to try to destabilize your country, because Europe is being turned into a destabilization zone. It's being turned into a conflict zone. That's where the money is. The money for Lockheed Martin, etc., is in a conflict zone. Ideally, they'd like to have planes flying over Paris, dropping bombs and blowing up people, saying they're terrorist cells, they're this and that, right? It's now a conflict zone and they are making money off of that. So Europe is simply being transformed into a conflict zone. That's all it is. It is being the Middle East extended. It's being Syria extended. It's being turned to Syria extended, Libya extended. That's what they're doing. They're turning you into an impoverished, brainwashed, but I was going to say brainwashed conflict zone, but more and more European people are becoming less and less brainwashed, but it don't matter for them, because as long as they can destabilize you, they're good. And they got mercenaries now to utilize that look like you. You can't tell. It's a Ukrainian person. You dress them up, they may look like they're French. You'll be able to tell, right? And you've already got a lot of people who are refugees in your country from all over the world. A few more refugees that just happen to be members of sleeper cells and controlled by the CIA. How will you know? You won't, until they all take to the streets and they say, we don't like the new prime minister who said they want out of NATO, and we're all going to the streets for democracy. Yes, that's right. They're fighting for democracy. So that's where we are right now. As I said, I think Russia's has to prioritize where they're using their firepower, and they prioritize Ukraine. And if you think about it, Ukraine is the big cheese, man. It is the big cheese. That's why it's going to be difficult for Trump to get out of that, because the neocons know. I think the neocons are concerned that they're horrified that they could be driven out of power in the U.S. They're scared of that. I think they're horrified that if Trump truly, we don't know, but if he truly says, I'm going to get some people that investigate, man, what he would find, not him, but let's say they had a Kash Patel or whoever who says, I'm going to investigate Russiagate. I'm going to investigate whatever, the charges in the Trump, against Trump. I'm going to investigate January 6th. I'm going to all these operations that the intelligence agencies have been involved in. If somebody would do an honest investigation of those, it would be shocking to the conscience of the American people and of the world. So I don't know that it's going to happen, but we shall see. But we got another 5 or 6 weeks where the agents of chaos are going to continue their reign of madness and terror from one end of this green planet to the other. And keep your eye next on the South China Sea, on the Korean Peninsula, on the Philippines. They want to, they are afraid, particularly the Korean Peninsula, because Trump has specifically said that he wants to meet with Kim Jong-un, that he wants to improve relationships with the government of South Korea, and that he wants to work to towards some kind of a peace deal. Now, one other thing I'll say, the North Koreans have kind of said, look, we don't trust the Americans. You can't get a deal with these people. You know what I mean? You can't. The sheep cannot get a deal with the wolves, because wolves, the nature of wolves is to eat sheep. So if you're a member of the sheep union and you think you're going to get a peace deal with wolves, ain't happening. So I think that the North Koreans will be highly suspect of any proposals made by the Trump team. But I tell you this, they're going to be willing to talk. And so the neocons got to stop that. Keep your eyes on the Korean Peninsula. The neocons got to act there to try to start some kind of a war, some kind of a conflict, something. Keep your eyes on the South China Sea. They haven't got a conflict in Asia. That's the one place that they haven't been able to turn, into a conflict zone. So let's keep an eye on what they're up to. All right. Meanwhile, everybody, let me look and see. I think we have.
The fact that the Syrian army practically did not resist the advancing forces of pro-Turkish and pro-American militants, and allowed them to capture the country within a few days, indicates that the generals surrounding President Bashar al-Assad betrayed their leader and sided with the enemy. All the key cities of Syria, including Sarakib, Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and even Damascus, fell without a fight. Even the militants themselves admitted that they did not meet serious resistance from government troops during their offensive. Moreover, the Syrian High Military Command was the very first to report on the fall of the Assad regime and the flight of the Syrian president from Damascus. The same High Military Command that had to defend the legitimate government to the last, which had served so faithfully. My dear truth seekers, to be honest, the current behavior of the Syrian army reminded me of the tragic events of the protracted Iraq War that lasted from 2003 to 2011. Let me remind you that during this war, the rather powerful 700,000-strong Iraqi army also began to behave very strangely. Iraqi army units stopped resisting along the entire combat contact line, surrendering strategically important towns and cities to the enemy without a fight. Back then, many Middle Eastern sources admitted that the Iraqi generals had betrayed Saddam Hussein and ordered their units not to resist the advancing enemy troops. The fact that after the end of the war, practically all Iraqi generals received high positions in the new government of Iraq is clear evidence that Saddam Hussein was defeated and lost his country due to the betrayal of his own generals. My dear truth seekers, I am absolutely sure that the same thing will happen again, but this time in Syria. Pro-Turkish militants who came to power in Syria will also give the Syrian generals, who betrayed Bashar al-Assad, high positions in the new government of the country. As I said earlier, Bashar al-Assad's main mistake was that after the convincing victory of the Syrian army in 2016, he got rid of all experienced and independent combatant commanders, and put in their place, as it seemed to him, loyal generals, who were not even having experience in commanding troops. In addition, for 8 years, Bashar al-Assad has also soured relations with all the militias, who fought for him from 2011 to 2016. We are talking about Druze, Afghans, and Libyans. In fact, the units of these militias were the most combat-ready force in the Syrian army. However, after 2016, instead of continuing to strengthen relations with the militias and create good living conditions for them in Syria, the entourage of the Syrian president continued to steal and behave rather defiantly. All this has led to the fact that Libyans, Afghans, and Druze have lost motivation to fight for Bashar al-Assad. That is why when the pro-Turkish and pro-American militants launched their offensive against government forces, the experienced and well-armed units of these militias did not stand up for the Syrian president. Unfortunately, we need to admit that Syria is gone. And the civil war in this country will continue. The victorious pro-Turkish militants from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham continue to seize the remaining territories in Syria. At the same time, the militants made it clear that they intend to take control of the entire territory of Syria, including the oil-rich north of the country, where the US-backed Kurds are located. Moreover, they also intend to take control of the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Against this backdrop, on December 8, Israel sent troops into the border areas of Syria. According to Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Amichai Chikli, this was done in order to prevent pro-Turkish militants from settling near the Israeli border. Moreover, the Kurdish warlords also began to show discomfort with what was going on. According to them, the Kurds will never accept the authority of pro-Turkish militants. It is reported that the number of clashes between the US-backed Kurds and pro-Turkish militants has doubled over the past 48 hours. Against this backdrop, a full-scale conflict may begin in Syria not only between the Kurds and the militants of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group, but also between the United States and Turkey. By the way, the United States has already made it clear to Turkey that Washington will not abandon its support for the Kurds in the region, even despite Ankara's displeasure. In particular, US President-elect Donald Trump has invited the head of the Kurdish People's Defense Units, Mazlum Kobani, to his inauguration ceremony in Washington. In Turkey, Donald Trump's move was called unfriendly and even insulting. According to many experts, by inviting the Kurds to Washington, Donald Trump severely humiliated Erdogan and made it clear to him that the United States would not refuse to support Ankara's enemies in the region. As for the Russian military bases in Tartus and Khmeimim, their fate remains unclear. At the moment, Russia set these military bases on full alert. It is reported that the situation near these military bases is calm. The militants do not show aggression and do not try to attack. It is noteworthy that after a telephone call between Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, pro-Turkish militants from the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group declared that they want to establish ties with the Russian side, and that the fate of Russian military bases would be decided at the upcoming negotiations between Turkey, Russia, and the new Syrian authorities. If Vladimir Putin will not be able to keep these military bases in Syria, it will be a real victory for the United States and Britain. The fact is that it was thanks to these military bases in Tartus and Khmeimim that Russia kept the Black Sea Straits open to the Russian fleet and regularly supplied its forces in Africa with everything necessary. In the end, I would like to add that the main loser in this situation is Iran. All of Tehran's positions in Syria were completely destroyed within 1 week. At the end of 2024, it turned out that Russia, the West, and the countries of the Middle East greatly overestimated Tehran's military and political capabilities. All this time, the whole world thought that Iran was an advanced country in terms of an agent network, business contacts, modern weapons technologies, and its proxies in the hottest spots of the Middle East. However, then, in just a year of military pressure from Israel and the United States, Tehran began to rapidly lose all its influence and power, as a result of which Iran lost Syria, which for many decades had been a powerful stronghold of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
As the fall of the Assad government in Syria marks a seismic shift in Middle Eastern geopolitics, one that reverberates across regional alliances and global power dynamics. For over a decade, Bashar al-Assad's rule weathered immense challenges, from the initial protests of 2011 to full-blown civil war, the rise of ISIS, and the interventions of global powers. Yet, the collapse of Assad's regime, heralded by Scott Ritter as the biggest geopolitical trap of the century, could set the stage for even more profound upheaval. According to Ritter, the dismantling of the Assad government is not merely a local victory against an autocrat, but a strategic move by Western powers and Israel to dismantle the so-called axis of resistance. This alliance, which includes Iran, Hezbollah, and Palestinian factions, has been a formidable opponent of Israeli policies in the region. By toppling Assad, a key conduit for Iranian weapons and support to Hezbollah, the balance of power shifts dramatically, weakening resistance movements in Lebanon and Palestine. For Iran, Assad's fall is a devastating blow. Tehran invested heavily in propping up his regime, sending military advisors, deploying Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC forces, and funneling billions into Syria's economy and reconstruction efforts. Syria was not only a gateway for Iranian influence in the Levant, but also a critical supply route to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Without Assad, Iran faces the possibility of losing its foothold in Syria, and consequently, its ability to project power into Israel's northern borders. The shift may embolden Israel to escalate its campaigns against Iranian positions in the region, further destabilizing an already fragile landscape. Russia, too, emerges as a significant loser in this scenario. Moscow's military intervention in Syria in 2015 turned the tide in Assad's favor and reasserted Russia's influence in the Middle East. However, with Assad's government ousted, Russia's military presence in Syria could be jeopardized, undermining its strategic access to the Mediterranean via its naval base in Tartus. The fall of Assad also raises questions about Russia's ability to safeguard its investments and alliances in the region, especially as Western-backed or jihadist factions could vie for control in the resulting power vacuum.
Israel has been fighting a war against the axis of resistance since October 7th. When I say the axis of resistance, I mean not just Hamas in Gaza, but Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, against the Houthi, Ansarallah in Yemen, against the various militias in Syria and in Iraq, all overseen by Iran. Syria is a very important component of this. Syria is sort of the link that holds the chain of the Axis resistance together. Syria is also a transit point for the resupply for Hezbollah. Hezbollah has fought a war for a year, or more than a year, and they've expended a lot of resources. And they still have some resources, but one of the reasons why Hezbollah went along with this ceasefire is because, Hezbollah was exhausted. And so one of the things that was supposed to happen with this ceasefire is not only was the Israeli army getting the rest that it desperately needed. This ceasefire was driven by the Israelis, not by Hezbollah. The Israeli military was saying, we can't continue to do this fight. Our brigades are exhausted. We just sent the 7th Armored in, tried to take a village. It got hammered by Hezbollah. We brought the Golani in to support. These are our 2 elite units, and they're getting hammered. Our special forces were in the hill. Agos was in the hill doing their thing. They got hammered. We can't. And the reserves are looking the same. If the big boys are getting beat up, we don't want to have anything to do with this. Desertion rates were high. And the military turned to Netanyahu, who didn't want a ceasefire because he and his right-wing idiots were committed to the destruction, the strategic defeat of Hezbollah. He agreed to it. And at the time, I said, they haven't solved the Houthi problem. The Iranians are sitting there with 1,000 missiles ready to hit. They haven't solved that problem. This is just a temporary respite. Netanyahu's finished. Well, hell, everybody's been saying Netanyahu's finished for such a long time. He's done 3 or 4 elections where, he got beat, but then he comes back, forms a government, collapses, got beat. He has corruption charges. October 7th came in. He should have been removed, but he stayed on by saying, I am the security president. He's been dragging this war out, creating, the reason why Hezbollah accelerated is because he had to do something to explain the defeat of the Israeli army in Gaza. And yes, the Israeli army was defeated by Hamas because Hamas hasn't been defeated by Israel. When you say that your military objective is the physical destruction of Hamas, and a year and a half later, Hamas is still there, you haven't destroyed them, you've been defeated. You haven't physically destroyed Hamas. Hamas's job isn't to physically destroy Israel or occupy Israel. It's just to survive. And Hamas is surviving. Hezbollah's job was to lure Israeli military strength away from Gaza so that the Israelis couldn't come at it with everything they had. And the Iranians' job was to make this war expensive as hell. Come in and destroy the Iron Dome, make them burn up ammunitions, taking down a $30,000 drone with a $2 million missile. That's an exchange rate that isn't sustainable. And Nasrallah destroyed single-handedly the Israeli economy, shutting down the port of Eilat, through this economic blockade. And this is all Netanyahu's fault. He's losing. So when this ceasefire came in, I'm like, it's over for. I mean, I personally, I think I actually said this on some podcasts. I said my assessment is it's over for Netanyahu. He's reached the limit. There's nothing left. The Israeli society is turning on him. Seymour Hersh wrote this wonderful Substack piece about how Netanyahu is being investigated for misuse of classified information, lying to the Israeli people about the hostages, the whole hostage thing. People are rising up and saying, you've slaughtered our people, you've murdered them, you could have released them, but you didn't. And it's just all falling apart for Israel. And then this attack happens. And I think I rightfully called it when it happened, so did others. I said, this is an act of desperation by Israel. That this attack by HTS, these Turkish proxies, was supposed to take place in March, linked not to Israel, but to Russia and Ukraine. The Ukrainians were supposed to mobilize. This is why Blinken is sitting there, give me your 18-year-olds. We need to get 100,000 18-year-olds. We'll get equipment to them so that you can launch a counteroffensive in March to keep Trump's hands tied. And so they're trying to do that. And to support this, they were going to do this major offensive that would seek to put Russia in the horns of a dilemma, put Iran, because remember, Russian-Iranian strategic relationship in the horns of a dilemma. Do we continue to, these Ukrainians are coming after us. What an embarrassment would be for Russia to have been advancing, and suddenly get hit with a Ukrainian counterattack that recaptures some of the territory. That changes the dynamic at the negotiating table as well. And now Syria is saying, we need help. And the Russians don't have the forces to help, and the Iranians are otherwise tied down. That was the whole idea of this attack. They went forward prematurely. I mean, the Ukrainians were involved in this too. The expert use by HTS and the other forces, I can't call them rebel forces, we'll just call them the Turkish Islamist forces, expert use of FPV drones, first-person view drones. It has the Ukrainian touch. The Ukrainians were involved in facilitating this. These drones have played a very effective role. The city of Aleppo fell almost immediately. I mean, it was just a rapid collapse of the Syrian army. And I said, okay, Aleppo fell, but I believe the Syrian army said, we're withdrawing from Aleppo to regroup. I said, sure, okay. I had no reason to believe that the Syrian army no longer knew how to fight or had the will to fight. I thought that they withdrew, they regrouped, the Russians are going to bomb, the Iranians are going to bring in the popular militia, Hezbollah would send a couple of troops in, and you'd solidify the line, and these HTS people would overextend themselves, get cut off, destroyed, and push back, and Idlib would be gone. That ain't what happened. The next thing you know, they took Hama. How did they do that? Because the Syrian army quit. Literally just quit. They brought in the 4th Tank Division. They brought in the 25th Division, the Hamza Division. They brought in the Tiger Force. These are the elite units of the Syrian military, and they're coming in and they're retreating. They gave up, not just the city, but every place. They pulled back. Homs is a strategic city. If you go right now, the Iranians who are supposed to be resupplying Hezbollah right now, who desperately needs resupply because they fought a 1.5-year war and they ate down their stocks. The Iranians tried to bring an airplane into Damascus airport, and the Israelis said, we'll shoot that plane down. So there's no more air bridge from Iran to Syria, join up a ground bridge to go into Lebanon. A ground bridge, by the way, goes through Homs. And now it's a land bridge that starts at the Iraq-Syria border, where Al-Qaim is on the Euphrates River, and the sister city to Al-Qaim is a town called Abu Kamal. It's been in the news over the course of years because the United States and Israel have repeatedly bombed warehouse facilities in the vicinity of Abu Kamal, which we say are affiliated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and they are. This is where the trucks come in. They drop this stuff off in Abu Kamal, and then the trucks come in from Lebanon, pick it up, and they go along a highway that leads to Homs. And then from there they go into Lebanon, and they make it to they make it to Hezbollah. Homs is about to fall. HTS is advancing. The Syrian army is evaporating. I saw this. I haven't confirmed it, but the Russian government apparently put out a notice to Russian citizens in Syria: get out of the country. That's not too good. It's not stay away from Homs. It's get out of the country, as in this whole damn thing's about to fall. Russian defense forces, air defense forces, and such that have been deployed into the Homs area to provide again. You want to get your defenses out to create a broader screen against potential attacks. They've been withdrawn now to get closer to the naval facility and the airfield because the Syrian army is losing Homs. If Homs falls, that's it. The landline is between Iran and Hezbollah is cut. It's over. But it's not just that. The Syrian defense forces, the Kurds, have launched an attack, and they've apparently captured Abu Kamal. So Abu Kamal's gone. You can't get in. Homs is cut. Even if you get in, you can't get to Lebanon. And suddenly we are looking at the strategic defeat of the axis of resistance. Erdogan came out, and guys, I'm just telling you, I got it so wrong, apparently. I mean, when I first did the initial take, I thought Erdogan was going to be the one with mud on his face. Erdogan's up there now in control. He's saying, yeah, we're going to Damascus. He's looking to take down the whole thing. The fall of Assad, the fall of Syria, the black flag over Damascus. Everything Russia sought to prevent when they intervened in 2015 is about to happen. Assad, somebody said he would be practicing, dentistry in Moscow. No, I think that you'll see that there will be an Alawite rump state in Latakia region, and Assad will fall back there, and that's where the port is, and that's where the airfield is, and it'll become this sort of mini state. Ironically, it'll become the Alawite version of Idlib, meaning this tiny little rump state surrounded by a Syria that isn't what it was. We are looking, unless it gets reversed, and I keep reading things, things about Battlefield. They're saying that there's some counterattacks taking place and that the Russian Air Force is coming in and driving back, and that
For Israel, the situation is more nuanced. On the one hand, the removal of Assad eliminates a staunch ally of its enemies, particularly Hezbollah. The disruption of arms flows and the weakening of the axis of resistance represent a significant victory for Israeli security. On the other hand, the ensuing chaos in Syria could present new threats. Jihadist groups, long contained by Assad's regime, might resurface, posing unpredictable dangers along Israel's borders. Additionally, the absence of a central government in Damascus complicates any long-term resolution to the Golan Heights dispute, an issue Israel has used as a buffer but now faces in a state of ambiguity. Palestinians find themselves in an increasingly precarious position. Syria, under Assad, despite its internal strife, consistently opposed Israeli occupation and maintained a stance of solidarity with Palestinian resistance. The vacuum left by Assad's fall may isolate Palestinian factions further, diminishing their regional support and complicating their ability to resist Israeli expansionism effectively. Domestically, the collapse of Assad's government is likely to exacerbate Syria's humanitarian crisis. The country has already suffered immense destruction, with millions displaced and key infrastructure obliterated. Ritter's warning about the potential for a new crisis is prescient. Syria's fractured society and the myriad of competing factions create fertile ground for renewed conflict. Jihadist groups, previously suppressed, may exploit the vacuum to regain influence, leading to further bloodshed. Moreover, the involvement of external powers, each seeking to carve out their sphere of influence, could transform Syria into a battleground for proxy wars, echoing the chaos seen in post-Gaddafi Libya.
Retreat out of Aleppo, the rapid retreat out of Hama, and the rapid advance to Homs, I got to be careful reading some of this stuff, whether it's just propaganda. I saw the Syrian Minister of Defense come on their national TV and give a speech, and I'm just sitting there going, that dude's blowing smoke at people. I mean, this is just the verbiage he's using, the language he's using isn't of a leader that is in charge. When your argument to the people are, don't believe the propaganda, only read what you read on official government channels, everything else can't be trusted, that means that you're in a lot of trouble because the world has gone to hell. That's not the voice of a confident man. And so, you know, this is a situation where Netanyahu may have won. I mean, this is the military victory that Netanyahu has been searching for from the very beginning of this crisis. He kept saying, you have to keep me in power because I'm the only one that can give you the defeat of Iran and the axis of resistance. And he failed. He failed in Gaza. He failed in southern Lebanon. They couldn't stop the Houthi. And Iran defeated the Iron Dome. And you're just sitting there going, okay, it's over. If he pulls this off, because Israel was very much involved in this, if he pulls this off, that's the starvation of Hezbollah that he's been trying to achieve. That makes Hezbollah not viable long-term as a resistance movement. They can't keep it up without Iranian weapons coming in. And the landline's about to be cut. Hezbollah drops off the picture, off the radar. They may stay as a political movement, but they're no longer going to be this giant loaded pistol in the head of Israel. Gone. Syria is gone. Syria that has been, you know, the Golan Heights question is solved, ladies and gentlemen. If Bashar Assad falls, Golan Heights is forever Israel. It will never go back because the new government's going to say, yeah, you got it, baby. It's all yours. It's going to be the black flag government. Heads are going to roll. They're going to literally, all the people that are running around saying, oh, thank God Assad's fallen. Yeah, just wait. Wait till your women are wearing black hijabs and burqas and all your men are taken out in the street, shot, and have their heads cut off because that's what's going to happen. That is what's happening right now. Iran, where the hell is Iran? See, there's been some Iranian voices out there that have expressed extreme frustration at the new Iranian president, who has been putting the brakes on the IRGC's desire to be more aggressive vis-a-vis Israel, and now there seems to be this. Iran is trapped in this indecision. And it's the end of Hezbollah. And Turkey, I got it. I'm going to be eating a lot of crow because Erdogan, who I was sitting there saying is a failed leader, he's lost face. No, he's coming out as, if Netanyahu has his big victory, the next big winner is Erdogan, who,
that's a fact.
He's going to keep Aleppo. I just want people to understand what's about to happen here. Maps are going to be redrawn as this victory stands. Idlib and Aleppo will become part of Turkey, not part of Syria. And then they will dictate, the Kurds are going to get screwed again. And America's going to be, Trump's going to be, he can't be talking about sending forces into Bagram. He's going to be looking at a Bagram-style withdrawal of forces from Syria and Iraq. This is mind-boggling what's happened here. And here's my question. Where the hell was the Russian army in all this? They had a lieutenant general on the ground. They have Russian advisors out there. Do you not have a finger on the pulse of the health of the Syrian army? Were you not aware that the Syrian army wasn't ready for this fight? There's talk right now that the Syrian Army Corps has been bought off. Well, here's my other puzzling thing. The Israelis apparently set off the pagers and communication devices in the Syrian army on the night of the attack. So the Syrians had the same crisis that Hezbollah had, where all of their middle management suddenly lost hands and got their hips blown off. Why do these pagers and communication devices, why are they in the inventory? Where's your counterintelligence people? Hezbollah stuff goes off. Why didn't somebody say collect all the pagers in the radios and blow them up and issue new ones? Why did you allow these systems to stay in play? what the hell is going on here? This is confusing in the extreme. And I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around it. I'm looking, but the way things are going right now, and again, it's a very fluid situation. Instead of Netanyahu and Erdogan being the big losers, is I was putting money on this time last week. Looks like they're the strategic winners. Looks like the axis of resistance has been dealt a near fatal blow. I mean, they're going to lose Hezbollah. They're going to lose Syria. That leaves Iran isolated. It changes the whole dynamic of Iraq. The only ones that'll still be dancing the street with their curved daggers will be the Houthi, because they just don't give a damn about anything. Nobody can beat them. But this is a big deal, guys. This is a really big deal. This is one of these. I love it when people, Scott, didn't you say something earlier this week? I just told you I said something earlier this week. And yes, the new events have changed it. This is what it's like to be, an intelligence analyst, people. Okay? Intelligence analysts don't have a crystal ball where they go, I see clearly. Intelligence analysts take, cups of tea, drink it, and then throw the tea leaves on the ground and they read it. You want to know what it's like to be an intelligence analyst? How many people have taken one of those 1,000-piece puzzles? You've seen them in Christmas time in the cold. You put it out on the table and you try to assemble it. And you're always sitting there near the end, where does this piece go? Where does this piece go? But as you get more pieces put together, the picture starts to look clearer and clearer and clearer. Well, that's nice. You know how you do intelligence analysis? You take a 1,000-piece puzzle and you take 950 of the pieces and you burn them. You got 50 pieces left and you have to put it out there and tell you what the picture is. Welcome to the world of intelligence analysis, guys. And if you get the right 50 pieces, the picture's clear. If you get the wrong 50 pieces, you're doing a lot of speculation. And then what happens is, as things occur, more pieces get thrown on the table, and you start putting them together and you go, oh, damn, the thing I thought was a dog is a cat. So that changes this thing a little bit. Well, that's what happened. There was a lot of data last week coming in. A lot of assumptions were made based upon, past performance. Nobody said the Syrian army was going to collapse. Nobody said the Syrian army was going to collapse. And yet it's collapsing. That changes the picture. Nobody said that the Iranians would be lulled into absolute indecision. True promise 3, true promise 3. Iran's coming in with the rockets, baby. They're going to blow it off the map. Where is it? Not there. And the Russians, how did the Russians get it so wrong? How did the Russians get it so wrong? Now it explains why Putin fired the one 3-star general, brought in another 3-star general, because that 3-star general that got fired, his job is to write reports that go to the Kremlin that say, this is the health, this is the prognosis, this is what's going on. And you just know that Putin's sitting there with his generals going, last month this guy said everything's hunky-dory. And now it's not. What the hell is going on? Fired, bring in a new guy, find out what the hell's going on, give me the ground truth. But this is a very, 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 very confusing situation still. And depending on what happens, I was supposed to write, I write for Energy Intelligence. And I'm committed to write so I'm saying this for the benefit of their editors, because they're probably going, Scott, we'd really like that piece. Hey, Roland, if I had submitted the piece last week, you couldn't publish it.
The global implications are equally dire. The fall of Assad sends a message to authoritarian regimes aligned against Western interests. Survival is not guaranteed, even with robust alliances. This development could prompt recalibrations among nations like Iran, Russia, and China as they assess their vulnerabilities. Additionally, the precedent of using prolonged proxy conflicts to achieve regime change could embolden similar strategies elsewhere, fueling instability in other contested regions. Scott Ritter's analysis highlights a sobering truth. The ousting of Assad may achieve immediate strategic goals for Israel and its allies, but it opens the door to a new chapter of uncertainty and conflict. The weakening of the axis of resistance may realign regional power dynamics, but it also dismantles a critical counterbalance, potentially leaving the Middle East more volatile than ever. In the end, the fall of Assad could prove to be a Pyrrhic victory, one that ushers in an era of ungovernable chaos rather than lasting stability.
Cool. Follow me.